Oh, we're live. Hello, friends. It's time for the MMA Vivisection. We have a very special double header for you today with back-to-back fight cards this week. I should say, I want to say back-to-back just because they're on coinciding days, but that's not really what back-to-back means. So, I don't know. It's a double header show. We are running the cards back-to-back, whether the UFC is or not. That's their own damage.
They are outstretched arm and outstretched arm.
They're
close enough. They're close enough to touch. They're just not quite back to back.
That's right. And so yeah, we got a whole bunch of stuff to break down. We're going to try to run through it as quickly as we can, which means that we're in for like a 4-hour show, knowing us.
Yeah, probably. We're going to run through it as quickly as we can, which means we will be getting to UFC 213 in about 2 hours.
No, really, we are going to try to run through this quickly. I promise. As always, I'm Zane Simon, joined by Connor Rebish, both of us from BloodyElbow.com. And yeah, we've got two solid, fun fight cards that I'm looking forward to this week.
Yeah, same here. I'm up for both of them. Obviously, UFC 213 is the one with all of the really big name value, especially crowded on the main card. But both of these are pretty chock full of well-matched fights.
The big thing is that there is a ton of funk on these cards.
Yes.
There are just a ton of fighters on here where I'm watching him, I'm like, oh, God. So much of this fight is going to hinge on whether one guy does X. And
yeah, such as this fight, James Browne versus George Clinton. I mean, how can you predict that? It's too damn funky, Zane. How about this one? Curtis Mayfield versus... Okay. I'm running out of funk, guys.
I'm already regretting this. Marvin Gaye.
Let's get into it.
You know. Anyway, whatever.
Let's dive in. Let's dive
into this and start off with Tecia Torres versus Juliana Lima.
A totally reasonable fight at women's strawweight. It feels like it's been a while since Tecia Torres has fought. She fought in February. She beat Beck Rawlings.
Yeah, it was a long time before that. The UFC's not really been keen to book her, even though she's been healthy and asking for fights all the way through, which is why I think she took this fight on short notice, stepping in for Amanda Ribas because she wants fights.
Yeah, although if we're looking at like who's fought who when, I'm actually more pleased that we have Juliana Lima in this fight. I think you can give like the new signees of the division a break, stop having Juliana Lima out wrestle them, and let her test herself against a top fighter. Tecia Torres is that top fighter. I think with footwork and striking diversity, she is going to be able to make her wrestling work more effectively than Lima will with a more like one at a time, patient, slow, methodical style. So I think Torres, just by being able to change things up on a dime, is going to have the edge here. So I like Torres to win by decision.
Yeah, Lima's gotten busier with her striking lately. She has, I think, improved that part of her game a lot, but she hasn't improved it to Torres's level. Torres is a much better, busy pressure striker who works well going forward, and Lima doesn't have I don't think has the counters to really make Torres pay for being a little too bolt upright when she throws her combinations. And then Torres is one of the few fighters in women's strawweight that has a really well-developed counter wrestling game to go with an offensive wrestling game. Like, she's just hard to take down.
Yeah. She's very athletic, and everything is really well integrated. Like, everything just fits together really smoothly for her.
And that spells trouble for Lima, who tends to have to get her takedown game working when she's not facing lower level competition. So I'm glad they're giving Juliana Lima this fight. She's 35. She's been fighting since 2010. She's clearly a good fighter in the division, and there was no reason to keep softballing her with debuting fighters for her to just crush.
It's a fight that'll probably slot her right back into that gatekeeper position, but at least like give all the newcomers a break. Let Lima get a fight against a top person every now and then, rather than just killing off all the fresh prospects.
Yep. So Torres is the favorite here, opening at minus 270 and slowly falling all the way to minus 371 now. Lima is the underdog, opening at plus 190 and rising slowly to plus 289. I have no problem with that, considering that Lima's not a very good finisher and Tecia Torres is incredibly hard to finish. So if we're talking about a points battle, it's really hard to see Torres losing that.
Right.
That brings us to Gray Maynard versus Teruto Ishihara. Teruto Ishihara is the kind of fighter that can really handily lose to Artem Lobov and still be, he's still a good, interesting prospect. But that fight really showed that a lot of his style that he's developed for himself is really fundamentally broken for facing well-schooled opposition. Fortunately for him, Gray Maynard, while being a very well-schooled opposition, just probably doesn't have the durability to survive 3 rounds. Maynard, you know, his one win since 2012 was over Fernando Bruno, and Fernando Bruno put some scares into Maynard and wobbled him a few times early and made that an ugly firefight. And the last time Gray Maynard, fearsome power puncher, finished someone, knocked them out, finished a fight, was Joe Veras in 2007. So Ishihara's got a good chin. Gray Maynard does not have a good chin, and even if Gray Maynard has a big wrestling advantage and is got a much better approach and style for this fight, he's going to have to fight Ishihara for 15 minutes, and Ishihara even knocked Artem Lobov down late in a fight he was clearly losing. So,
yeah, I can't add too much to that. Gray Maynard really was just a bigger Mike Browne, wasn't he? Like he was real tough to beat until he became pretty damn easy to beat, just out of nowhere. Yeah, I think that if I want to add basically that if Maynard does make it past the first round, I think Ishihara does have a pretty bad habit of flagging. He throws so much power into everything and he moves around so much, so inefficiently, that Maynard really could get his wrestling working as the fight goes on, but I don't actually see him making it that far. I think Ishihara is too accurate, too powerful, too willing to just drop a hammer on the first opening he sees. I think he's going to knock Gray out in the first.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, but like I said, even in that Lobov fight where Ishihara was clearly losing and tired and not fighting well, he still dropped Lobov in the 3rd round. Like, he still carries that power late.
And in the Hirota fight, like, that's a fight where Maynard probably would not have survived that first round, but even then, a tired Ishihara kept nailing Hirota in the 2nd and 3rd, so.
Yeah, so. Maynard is currently sitting at, he opened at plus 200, and after some adjustment is slowly risen to plus 240, and Ishihara opened at minus 280. After some adjustment has slowly fallen to minus 305. That all seems right to me. Ishihara inside the distance is minus 134. Under a round and a half is plus 130. So,
yeah.
Nothing too great there. That brings us to a women's bantamweight bout, Jessica Eye versus Aspen Ladd.
Well, you know, I was thinking about this. I think we can afford to put a little bit of time into this fight just because I think Aspen Ladd could actually have a future in this division. Pat Wyman and I on the latest Heavy Hands were talking about like whether or not we missed Ronda Rousey, and both kind of surprisingly realized that we don't. And it's bizarre because Rousey is was such an anomaly as champion and did things that most fighters don't do. It really seemed, you know, she had a Hickson or a Hoist Gracie feel where she was just doing things that her division was not good enough to handle, but that the game built around those skills of hers was not really ever that solid or complete. And now that she's out of the picture, we had a little bit of shuffling. We've got Nunes making a really good case for being the next dominant champion in this division. It feels more like a regular MMA division now. Like there's top contenders. We're getting new people signing in. It's not just a conveyor belt to feed unprepared people to Ronda Rousey. And Aspen Ladd's a really good addition if you look at the division that way. She's very young. I think she's 22 years old. She's undefeated, I believe, from Invicta. I think 5-0 or 6-0. Has had quite a few TKOs. She's not a perfect fighter yet, not by a long shot. She's very rigid and stiff. She reminds me, watching her, I've been watching a lot of Jim Miller fights, working on a piece for him, and she reminds me of like when Jim Miller first realized he could punch people as well as grappling them. Like the technique was there. He was slipping and loading up and feinting, but it was very methodical and stiff, like a little too deliberate. It didn't feel natural. So that's kind of where she's at. But she can take a hell of a shot. She keeps coming forward. She will jab her way or left hook her way through anything the other person throws at her. And though she's not great at cutting off the cage, she does not stop coming forward and pushing the pace. So I think that Jessica Eye will actually have some great success against Aspen Ladd in the early going. She is, at her best, a very technical boxer. She can pivot, she can sidestep, she can maintain distance and counterpunch. But it tends to be that when someone puts a lot of pressure on Jessica Eye and she can't finish them, she eventually falls into her opponent's fight. We've all often said she is too scrappy for her own good. She just cannot resist a firefight. And so I think this may look a little bit like her fight with Miesha Tate, where Ladd is just going to be so relentless, so willing to come forward and eat punches if she has to, that eventually Eye is going to stop, you know, watching her P's and Q's and will be out grappled.
So you're taking Aspen Ladd?
Yeah, I'll take Ladd by unanimous decision.
Yeah, this is a tough one for me because I think a big part of it really, this is the first sort of funk fight that I was talking about where it really is, to me, a matter of, does Jessica Eye make the kind of mistakes that she always makes? Because if she does, then she can easily let Ladd win this fight.
This is going to be a super low impact preview of Gaethje versus Johnson. Is kind of basically what this fight is.
Yeah, and because Ladd or Eye is faster. Like she is a lot faster and a lot smoother as an athlete, and Ladd's game, a lot of her game is built around eating a lot of punches, like just walking through stuff and being there to eat shots. And so it's really hard to see that and look past that and say, no, Ladd's going to win. But then it's Jessica Eye. And the big thing that, like, I was noticing one of the things that she does, you know, and like her fight against Betch Kohea, is that she just gets so focused on doing one thing.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I'm gonna punch Beth Kohea really hard, or Betch Kohea really hard, and that's like all she's thinking about is punching her hard in the head. And suddenly she starts to get clipped, and she starts to get outworked as she's waiting for that, and starts to fall behind. And the other thing I noticed too is that, I mean, she kind of closes her eyes a lot when she, like...
She's a tense exchanger. She, like, bunches up her shoulders, flinches, and just kind of... That's the thing. She, like, the nerves affected. The pressure gets to her, and she kind of just goes nuts at times.
When she throws really hard, usually at the end of her right hand, she's already flinching for a return shot. Like, she's got her eyes closed, and she's kind of, like, throwing it, but like that, and kind of, like, just not set up to actually take a punch.
Yeah.
And then, you know, she has the other problems of when punches start coming, she starts to kind of back up and flinch and pull her head straight back. And I don't know, it's tough because that is the thing. Ladd will keep coming after her. Ladd will just keep marching her down and throwing 1-2s and just stay systemic with it.
And when she gets someone to the ground,
Yeah.
Aspen Ladd is, I mean, she has the makings of like a Khabib or a Damian Maia type. She's got a really natural feel for balance, floating in top position. She's not a particularly damaging puncher from there, but it's really difficult to out scramble her and get her off of you. So, you know, I think maybe it's a mistake to say that Ai is too scrappy for her own good, because it makes it sound like it's really praise, when in reality, I think like the flinching, the wild exchanging, the rigid focus on one thing and one thing only, those all kind of suggest to me that she scraps because she gets to a place where she feels she has no choice. She scraps because she's uncomfortable, and like feels like she has to fight her way out, even when sometimes that's not the case, where it'd be better for her to reset and get her distance going again. And I just don't see her avoiding that habit in a fight with somebody as aggressive as Ladd.
Yeah, the big thing that just I keep coming back to is speed, and the feeling I had, the underlying fear I have with Ladd about this fight is that she's really never faced someone who could or would be willing to strike with her consistently and make her pay for any extended time for how robotic she is.
And someone who can really surprise her with another level of athleticism. She's not really faced someone with that kind of pop.
Exactly. And that's the thing that has me concerned, because she is such a damage sponge that it's just like, yeah, this works when you can actually, you know, somebody actually secretly wants to grapple you and is going to get tired of striking with you after 3 minutes and is going to start just trying to force a bunch of wrestling exchanges. But I don't know. Like,
if Ladd's chin is up to par, maybe she's not Jim Miller. Maybe she's women's bantamweight's Pat Healy.
Yeah.
Which, honestly, you could use a Pat Healy in this division. You could use a damaged sponge who relentlessly pursues the grappling. I think I will absolutely win the first round. I think she may make Ladd look pretty bad. But, again, like the Miesha Tate fight, once the momentum was shifted, there was nothing I could do to change it.
I'm going to pick Ai to pick up her first win in a while, and I'm going to feel weird about it, but I think it could easily be a round and a half to Ai, round and a half to Ladd, and you're just sitting on a split decision trying to figure out how to score it.
I'm glad, by the way, that Ai is still in the UFC. I was worried they were going to cut her. She had a bunch of losses in a row, but she's still a valuable asset to this division as a gatekeeper at the very least.
And just like that, we are at the main event, Ed Herman versus CB Dollaway. And this is another weird fight because it is really hard to figure out what the hell is going on with CB Dollaway.
Yeah.
Honestly, like Ed Herman, we know who Ed Herman is. He is slow. He has actually surprising speed in his combination punching, which is what kind of shocks people, is that for as foot slow as he is, he will. Oh, I didn't pull out odds for the Ai Ladd fight. Ai is currently riding at, after a bunch of adjusting, starting out at plus 115, has slowly fallen to minus 101. And Ladd opened at minus 155 and has slowly risen to minus 124. So those odds are trending closer to even, which is about where I think they should be.
That feels fine to me.
Okay. Ed Herman, we know he's foot slow, but he tends to shock people just a little bit with not how fast he throws one punch, because when he throws one punch, he tends to just kind of wind up and just wing something huge. But it's how quickly his other hand follows that punch that actually tends to kind of catch people off guard.
Yeah, and I don't even know if it's speed or maybe just the fact that Ed Herman is super experienced and he's just a very well-drilled rote striker. Like he strikes like a guy who has been throwing combinations on pads and in drills for many, many years. And so people get surprised. He looks slow, but then 4 more punches, they just automatically come after that first jab or whatever, and people get overwhelmed.
Yeah, I think it's very much, it's the value of experience. It's the way that fighters get better, even if they don't make big leaps that you think they're going to make, they always get better over time just by being in more fights.
Yeah, and Ed Herman has been in like a higher level of fight than most fighters for a very long time.
And on the flip side, CB Dollaway, you know, he used to be this wrestle boxer, and he still sort of is, but it's taken on some weird dimensions. And part of this is that I think that it seems like power MMA goes through striking coaches at kind of an alarming rate.
I think they still have Chaz Turner.
Maybe because like I was talking to Ryan Bader before his Phil Davis fight, and he's talking about how they changed their whole coaching staff.
Oh, so it was Chaz Turner for a while. Now they've got another striking coach. Yeah, Bader and Dollaway have both undergone like very clear phases in who, you can tell that someone new is teaching them to strike.
Yeah, and I think, you know, for Bader, it seems to have worked all right. Like he's been able to sort of assimilate all these tools into something that functions as a game. Yeah. Like he's had some weird moments where he was like Muay Thai Ryan Bader, and it was like, okay, this is actually a little funky.
Yeah.
But CB Dollaway does not seem to have assimilated those. It seems like over time he's just gotten more lost as to what kind of striker he is.
Yeah, Dollaway had a home when it was Jose Benavidez Sr., the boxer, who was teaching them, because there was a brief period where Dollaway was looking really sharp with just fundamental boxing skills, and now that they've changed it up, he seems to have just totally collapsed.
Yeah, so he throws a lot of sharp kicks. He's very reliant on a power kicking game, and then he tends to lunge in behind big single strikes and then throw a bunch of short power hooks inside, so that he's getting basically in these all or nothing brawls where they're all predicated on him having a big lunging moment and then being able to follow that momentum up with like 3 or 4 more shots where he's almost always in danger and then get back out. He's a lot faster than Ed Herman and a lot slicker with his movement and able to find those shots. And if he can actually turn his wrestling on, he can out-wrestle Ed Herman. It's not like Ed Herman hasn't been out-wrestled. He's never he's 2 foot slow to have ever solved his wrestling problem. But part of having the style for Dollaway is that he also doesn't really disguise his shots anymore. So his wrestling hasn't been very functional lately. People have just been able to stuff it because he's either shooting from way outside or he's throwing a punch from way outside, and they're not really interconnected.
And Herman has certainly seen enough takedowns that if you let him see one coming, he can stop it.
I want to pick Dollaway here, but that combination, along with durability issues where he's been knocked out 4 times, and by, you know, not just the Lyoto Machidas and Nate Marquardt of the world, but the Jared Hamans of the world as well. I kind of think Ed Herman's going to take this just based off. I mean, Ed Herman's been knocked out too, so twice, but by Derek Brunson and Nikita Krylov. But CB Dollaway can't piece Ed Herman up like Nikita Krylov could, and is unlikely to just come out and bum rush him the way Derek Brunson did.
Yeah.
So I got to go with Ed Herman here.
Yeah, it kind of feels like it may end up looking a little like Herman's fight with Tim Boetsch, where you have this guy who, he's strong, he can hit a nice takedown, he can land a big hard right hand, but at that point in Boetsch's career, like, it wasn't the Boetsch who just beat Johnny Hendricks. The pieces of his game were not fitting together in that fight, and they were like shot for shot. But eventually, Ed Herman's like superior technique won out. Like, just being a crafty veteran who knows how to put his shots together and who knows how to ride momentum as it builds and stays calm. That's Ed Herman. And I think Dollaway may be the one to kind of panic before Ed does. So it's a hard fight to call. Like, Dollaway is definitely younger, more athletic, can certainly throw a faster punch, can shoot a faster takedown. Herman is just so incredibly slow, but he's been incredibly slow for his entire career. And it's been a pretty damn impressive career all the same. So, yeah, I think Ed Herman's just going to be a little too crafty and eventually knock Dalloway out. The curious case of Clarence Byron Dalloway.
All right, odds on this fight. Dalloway is the favorite, opening at -155 and adjusting down to -200, where he's basically stayed. He's at -192 now. Ed Herman opened at +115, adjusted up to +164, where he's more or less stayed as well. He's now +158. So, I don't really know why Ed Herman would be an underdog to CB Dalloway. I don't know. Like, to me, this feels like it should just be even odds. I don't really see any. I would never pick anything out of it because
no.
Dalloway especially is too unpredictable.
Yeah, Dalloway is the X factor, and unfortunately, he's not such an unreliable X factor that he couldn't win. So, yeah, it's too hard. It's too hard to call to put any money on it, I say.
All right, that brings us to a welterweight bout: James Krause versus Tom Colicchio.
Tom Colicchio has probably improved more than any other fighter over the course of this season of The Ultimate Fighter. TUF 25 seems to have really gelled with like Dwayne Ludwig and I think Elliot Marshall and Matt Browne and TJ Dillashaw, the wonderful coaching staff that Dillashaw brought in for that show. Colicchio is like suddenly knows he can take a shot more than he used to, doesn't react as badly. He throws a jab. He moves forward and stays relatively close to his opponent. Like, he has gotten so much more comfortable on the feet, but he started from such a poor place of striking that, and who knows that now he's gone back to his original team if those improvements were just temporary, because for most of his career, Tom Colicchio has been doing the same thing over and over and over again. And he's not a fantastic athlete. And he can take a hell of a shot, but he can't exactly like respond with a hard enough shot to make you pay for it. And James Krause, I think, just didn't really get to shine the way he actually can in the UFC on The Ultimate Fighter. I think, you know, the reason that he was on this redemption series is that he got squashed early on his last attempt at doing the show, but then obviously had a very impressive run in the UFC. I think he's one of many fighters who are just not suited for that style of competition. You won't see the best of James Krause unless he's got a full camp and the coaches that he has chosen. And if the James Krause who has been fighting in the UFC shows up, even against the Tom Colicchio we've seen on The Ultimate Fighter, you got to think that James Krause will win. Better athlete, more dangerous finisher, more dynamic. Just everything is kind of in his favor.
Yeah, I mean, Colicchio being knocked out a couple times previous to this too doesn't give me a lot of, like, he's just so stiff. Yeah, that's the thing. And like, if it weren't James Krause he was facing, you know, then I might have more faith in him just being able to bull through and like get to the grappling and out grapple Krause.
Yeah,
Krause is a very scrappy, reasonably crafty grappler. He's not the top of the food chain. And largely he's not the top of the food chain because he's not physically the top of the food chain. He's not a powerful dude. He's just not. But he's very crafty, and Colicchio does not strike me as a dude who's, you know, he's just not a good enough athlete to overwhelm Krause.
Krause isn't like a massive explosive kind of athlete, but he's quick and agile and fluid, and Colicchio is none of those things. So, unless he's taking your back, man. That's the one thing he does phenomenally well, is take your back. But yeah,
if Krause just gives up his back in a scramble, then obviously all bets are off. But if Krause can keep Colicchio predictable, then it should be his fight to win.
Yeah, that's a narrow path to victory against a good, well-rounded, established UFC veteran.
Yep. And yeah, I was watching Krause on the some footage of him on the show, and I was just like, this is why I hate watching TUF. That's right. Because it literally just looks like somebody showed up to the gym today to fight James Krause. And he hasn't had a plan. He doesn't have any structure. He's just kind of doing some stuff. And when you know, over time, the fact that he's better conditioned and a little craftier than his opponent shines out. But it is not the kind of fight where it's like, ah, yes, you've clearly had a great, you know, you are clearly on the top of your game for this.
We'll put it this way. James Krause is a lot luckier that he has a great chin when he's on The Ultimate Fighter than he ever has been when he's in the UFC.
Yeah.
It just doesn't look his best. And it's his durability comes through. And normally you don't have to see how tough James Krause is because he outslicks people.
Yep. Krause opened at minus 350 and today, basically. So these odds are not old. They've bounced around a little up and down, adjusting. He's currently at minus 344. So they're narrowing barely. Colicchio opened at plus 250 and is currently at plus 263. So, Krause is also not the kind of dude that I would pick to necessarily just go out and shut anybody down. His fight with Shane Campbell was really close and tough. His win over Dan Cruikshank is impressive, but Dan Cruikshank is also the kind of dude that gives a lot of people impressive wins over him. And, then his fight with Sam Stout was pretty back and forth too. And in between then he injured Jamie Varner and lost 3 other bouts. So he's not.
But we also saw in that Shane Campbell fight, I think we saw kind of the best of James Krause. Like, Campbell's a very good kickboxer, and Krause ended up technically outclassing him on the feet.
Yeah.
And I just hope that the stint on The Ultimate Fighter, the long layoff since that Shane Campbell fight, I hope that James Krause can just get back to where he was, because I think he was progressing as a fighter.
But I'm saying I'm not surprised that the odds are narrowing a little, because Krause is not the kind of guy to just go out and put a clinic on somebody. Yeah.
But I think he's a pretty easy pick over Tom.
Yeah.
Hate to say it. I love Tom Colicchio. He's a very likable guy, but.
Yeah. All right. There aren't much prop bets. Just an over under 2.5 rounds, which I wouldn't touch. But
yeah.
I don't touch anything, so maybe that doesn't matter. All right. That brings us to Angela Hill versus Ashley Yoder. And let's see, is this you or me? I've lost the thread. You. This is me. This fight is a good reckoning for Angela Hill that she needs in the UFC to establish exactly where she is and what she's doing in front of a UFC audience and in front of the UFC brass. Because, the Jessica Andrade fight showed that Hill can fight at a high level for an extended period of time, just not a championship high level. Like, she's still missing the parts of her game that are going to make her really competitive at a really high level.
Yeah.
And a big part of that is that her high movement footwork game she's trying to work on and make happen tends to tire her out a little, especially in a high octane firefight with somebody who's constantly making her move. She also, because she's put so much emphasis on that footwork, has lost a little of snapping her punches. So she has a little trouble scaring people off with that. And when she gets more flat-footed, she's still not the best wrestler out there. But her opponent in Yoder is really just somebody who's going to go out there and give Angela Hill every chance to shine using slick footwork. Yoder is just kind of a chasing, pawing striker who doesn't really have any finesse to her striking game at all. And she's a really scrappy grappler and wrestler if you let her tie up with you. So it's really, for Hill, it's just a test of how much do you let this woman tie up with you? How many times do you put yourself in trouble? And even then, Hill's the better athlete. She's the better conditioned fighter. Yoder faded fast, really fast in her fight with Justine Kish when Kish made her work. And so it's really just, this is the fight for Hill to shine. And if she doesn't, it's because the problems that she still has in her game are such that they need a lot of fixing that she's not focusing on.
Yeah, I it's basically looks to me like a step back to the kind of people that Angela Hill was dominating it in Invicta. And she wasn't like running away with every one of those fights, having a dangerous grappling game. You know, like she's a good athlete in that she's again very fast, very agile, but is not particularly strong. So just being a dangerous, aggressive submission grappler can work. You can drag her into that kind of scramble. What we're basically looking for, like we saw some signs of what Angela Hill really can become in that Jessica Andrade fight. It was a very difficult stylistic matchup for her, and I thought she adapted really admirably. Even if she clearly lost, she had some really good moments. And so basically what I'm hoping to see in this fight, I mean, I'm picking Angela Hill, same reasons that you stated. What I'm hoping to see, though, regarding your comments about how like extravagant her movements are, how exhausted she becomes by moving that way, is have you seen the Zorro movie with Antonio Banderas?
Not for like a decade, but yes.
When his like master is teaching him to fence, he gives him some allegory or whatever about circles on the ground in his training room. And he's like, here we have these circles, right? There's this very large circle. And we will start by fencing along this large circle. And as you get better, the circles will become smaller and smaller until finally we'll be fencing just here in the middle. And that's what we're looking to see from Angela Hill, is the movements just getting smaller, everything becoming more compact and more efficient. I know it can fit with the style because I've seen people who have the same problems, who like lose power and do inefficient things because they move so much, like Frankie Edgar and Dominic Cruz. Both of those guys have gotten a lot more compact and efficient in the later stages of their career. So I know it's probably coming, and we saw signs of it in the Andrade fight. I'm just hoping that we'll really get to see Angela Hill outclass Ashley Yoder by showing off yet more developments in that area of her game.
The big concern there is, though, that Angela Hill doesn't have a wrestling base to start from. And so as she closes those circles, if she doesn't shore up her takedown defense and continue to shore it up, then she opens herself up to get taken down.
But I think the adaptation for her there, not having the wrestling of someone like Edgar or Cruz, is going to be her clinch game. She'll be a little more like Ioane and Jacek and tie up. And she did a good work there against Andrade as well. Tied up, landed some knees, and then used that to separate. So, because you do have to be able to, boxers clinch all the time when they can no longer create space. MMA fighters run into this problem where you can't close the distance with the person who's coming after you without being able to out wrestle them.
Yep.
So, yeah, I think that we'll see Hill improve the clinch and just start to tighten up slowly all of the little interstitial pieces of her game.
Absolutely. Hill is a pretty good size favorite right now, open at minus 245, now up to minus 340. And Yoder opening at plus 175, now to plus 266.
Fine with it.
I don't have any big problems with that, just because Yoder seems, like I say, she fades and she's not a great athlete and she's not a structured striker in any way, shape, or form. However, let's see. Yoder inside the distance is actually about the same. It's plus 369. So if you want to take a chance on her submitting Hill, that would be the chance to take.
Yeah. But again, no, I wouldn't say so. It's not like Hill didn't face some really good grapplers in Invicta. Livia Renata Souza was a very good grappler. She gave her a tough fight.
The problem for Hill isn't so much that she's a bad grappler. She's actually a very good grappler. It's that she allows herself to get put into positions where she can lose a fight.
Right. Yeah. I agree.
So, and even at her worst, I think Hill's got this fight sewn up. That brings us to a light heavyweight bout: Jordan Johnson versus Marcel Fortuna.
Boy, apparently Marcel Fortuna has devastating knockout power, as we saw in his heavyweight fight with Anthony Hamilton. Certainly an unexpected result. I'd be surprised, even back down at 205, if he could do the same thing to Jordan Johnson. Mostly throughout his career, Fortuna has really not shown much of a process in his fights. He's just sort of aimless, and that is the opposite of Jordan Johnson, who beat several dozen shades of shit out of Frank Waston Jr. in his UFC debut. And yeah, it's just kind of like a nose to the grindstone, aggressive, blue collar, backwoods. He's a white man, is what I'm saying. You know? Basically, like he's that stereotype. Like he gets in your face, he ties you up, he makes you work, and takes you down and beats you up. I just think it's just too consistent for Marcel Fortuna to have anything other than another puncher's chance.
Yeah, I mean, even rewatching his fight with Anthony Hamilton, it really, like, Fortuna got hit some. He
wasn't setting up that right hand.
No,
he just found it. You know, he picked it up off the floor, and it happened to be the right shot for the win.
And it also happens that Anthony Hamilton is another one of those dudes with like a huge head that just is right there to be hit.
Yeah. Boy, I hope I never go into fighting. I will suffer the same fate as Anthony Hamilton, but much worse.
That big old head.
I got a melon head.
All right. So, like, yeah, Fortuna. I mean, part of this too is, you know, I was super impressed with what he showed in that fight. Like, the biggest thing with Fortuna is that he looks like he's actually got himself into fight shape rather than muscle-bound jiu-jitsu dude shape.
Yeah.
Because that's what he was regionally, where it was just like he would go out and he would slug it out with people for a minute, get tired, go for some bad shots, and then kind of try to out-wrestle people for a little and land some ground and pound. And, you know, when he won, it's not like he lost a lot, but it was a lot of, like, him being huge and both of them being tired and him pushing some absurd pace that gassed everyone out and then allowed him to grapple. Like, Marcel Fortuna fights, a lot of his grappling exchanges were marked by him losing position, going for things way too quickly. So I really do feel like Johnson can probably, like, Fortuna is a much more dangerous fighter now that he seems like he's less muscle bound and less likely to gas. But I don't see this, like, the setups for Johnson are too prevalent with him being able to get wrestling in top control. The question will be, can Johnson stay on top of Fortuna and not get submitted? And, you know, Fortuna doesn't have any submissions off his back. Yeah. He has one arm bar in the first fight of his career. Everything else is, you know, baseball choke, rear naked choke, side choke.
Fortuna's that weird case of like a really decorated submission grappler who seems to come into MMA and suddenly becomes like the weird esoteric submission guy who doesn't have any process. It's almost as if like he thinks like all I can do is surprise people on the ground. And so he goes for really risky stuff. And I think often underestimates the level to which submission grappling and especially submission defense have grown in MMA. Like you got to have a whole game like Damian Maia to make that level of grappling expertise work. You can't just be the guy who surprises people and gives up position, because most of the elite people you're going to fight they're going to be able to stop the first few surprising submissions.
Yep. Odds on that fight. Let's see. Johnson comes in opened at -134, immediately adjusted down to -250, currently -243. And Fortuna opened at +100, immediately adjusted up to +200, currently at +197. I got no problem with that. Fortuna has certainly got the power and the submission acumen to have good chances to finish this fight. It should not be that wide, but Johnson deserves to be a good, solid favorite for his consistent infighting, clinch boxing, sneaky takedowns, and powerful top control and grappling approach.
Yep, I'm with you.
Let's see. That brings us to middleweight bout, Brad Tavares, Elias Theodorou. And this is going to be another funky fight.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly that's because of Elias Theodorou, who really likes to make fights weird. You know, he's sort of like it's like the whole Dr. Evil thing where it's like, it got weird, didn't it? You know, like, I don't know what he means to make a fight weird to start with. It's just it gets weird.
I just want to hear your Dr. Evil impression.
No,
you backed away from it there. I thought you were going to go for it.
I know. I was going to go in on it, but I realized I haven't seen those movies in long enough to actually remember how he sounds. So I would just have to do some like generic villain voice. And it would be, the whole thing would fall apart on that merit.
You know how Dr. Evil sounds? It's like a don't you know? It's kind of like an evil Wisconsin accent. That's kind of Dr. Evil, like an evil British man who grew up in Wisconsin.
There you go. All right.
I just realized I can't do it either.
Exactly. The other side of this is Brad Tavares, who kind of has Jessica I's problem. Kind of. Where he's really solid at pocket brawling, and then everything else surrounding that is like a continual question mark.
Yeah.
Out at range, he's just kind of inactive, and he'll throw the occasional straight punch, and he kicks well, but just waits a lot for opportunities to come to him. In the clinch, he gets inactive, and he gets just dragged into these slogging fights where he doesn't do much. And then like, he's not terrible at defending takedowns, but he's not a like masterful wrestler or grappler either.
He's got pretty good takedown defense. I think his numbers took a hit when he fought Yoel Romero, but typically he's pretty hard to take down.
He's not. He's not hard. He's hard to take down. He's just. It's not. There's not like a. And he's even wrestled. So I'm trying to remember now that fight he had. That fight he had with Lorenz Larkin was such a weird moment for him.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was where he just like took the fight to Larkin all the way through, if I'm remembering correctly now. Just really went after him, and it was like, Brad Tavares' game is clicked.
Yeah, and he did a lot of tying him up and holding him down too, but that was kind of the Brad Tavares game, was like pressure, grinding, and just constant.
And actually not taking his foot off the gas, which is the big thing for him, because that's what he seems to do. Like in his fight with Bubba McDaniel right before that, he was doing all right to beat McDaniel, but he just let McDaniel hang around so long in that fight that Bubba started landing shots on him as the fight went on. It was just like such a low output, consistent, same approach every time way of fighting will let any fighter get success against you given enough time. And so the Lorenz Larkin fight is like, yeah, things are clicking. And then he fought Yoel Romero, and things haven't quite been clicking the same ever since. Like,
he did okay against Romero too. It wasn't like he didn't get blown out. He took him the distance.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying like, but the fight, like having a good plan and a good way to approach the fight in a way that is just like consistent and a top level performance just continues to evade him.
Yeah.
And the thing with Theodorou is that he's going to have a plan to frustrate Brad Tavares.
It's about all he does these days is just frustrate his opponents.
And that might be enough. Like, it was enough to beat Cesar Ferreira, and Cesar Ferreira's most recent performance was a lot more inspiring than Brad Tavares'.
Yeah.
Because like the thing is that Tavares is so inactive from range kickboxing, like at range, that Theodorou is gonna have a lot to work with circling around the edges. The other question then becomes a clinch where both guys are kind of inactive, and like neither of them get nearly enough done, and neither of them are nearly as good of offensive wrestlers as they are defensive wrestlers. So
What's
you're
the
gonna
pick,
have.
Zane? You got to pick one of them.
I'm gonna pick Tavares. I don't want to.
Yeah.
But the thing is going to be that out at range, they're gonna both have this funky, equivalently not very effective low output striking game. Theodorou is gonna march in on Tavares much more willingly at times and in bursts. And then Tavares is a much better pocket puncher when those options actually open up and when those exchanges happen. So I think he's going to win just enough of those to win the fight.
Yeah.
But we are talking like razor thin margins here.
Yeah, I'm with you all the way. I think Tavares, we've just kind of realized that he's just not really dynamic enough to fight consistently the way he might like to against like the upper echelon of the middleweight division. The Larkin fight was solid. I thought the Boach fight was solid too. It was a lot of the same stuff. And Romero fight. But I think like maybe the Boach fight is what changed his mind or gave him some pause because, you know, he was fighting well. He was putting the pressure on. He was pretty aggressive and then he got knocked out.
Yeah.
And comes back against Nate Marquardt, knows, you know, I have all these advantages, but here we have a really fast, powerful, accurate knockout puncher. Maybe I should, and then he gets knocked out by Robert Whittaker, like instantaneously. So if you think about it from like a mental perspective and seeing Tavares finally getting comfortable being aggressive, you can understand why those results kind of take that out of him. I don't think, right, it's understandable. I don't think Theodorou is going to be able to do the same thing. He's not a powerful puncher or kicker. He is the striking equivalent of a smotherer but of like a John Fitch smother, like almost his reputation, like this sort of vibe that he's just constantly touching you with things and annoying you. It can shut down some fighters, but Cesar Ferreira is kind of middleweight's Alistair Overeem.
Yeah.
Not anymore. Well, now we have Bohashinha, who is middleweight's Ubereem, but Ferreira has all of Overeem's like complexes about getting hit and getting folded up like a lawn chair. He knows it can happen. It's happened many times before. And even though Theodorou is not very powerful, the pressure very clearly got to Ferreira in that fight. It threw him off his game. And I don't think the same thing will happen to Tavares. I think he'll just kind of stay relatively middling sharp. And while he's not super dynamic, he's definitely faster and more technical as a kickboxer than Theodorou. So I think we'll see a few ugly exchanges, more than a few. But Tavares will start to land hard shots while Theodorou is just kind of pawing at him. And hopefully we'll eventually realize, like, oh, I can hit this dude. Because he can stop his takedowns. He can tie him up if he needs to. I think it's kind of a wash in the wrestling and grappling departments with these guys. So it just comes down to who's more willing to just step in and hit the other guy. And I think it's going to be Tavares.
Yeah, that's the thing, though, that Tavares is the dude who's just so prone to coasting. Like, they're both prone to coasting. They both are.
Yeah, but I think it may actually be a good thing that Theodorou is going to give Tavares something that feels like a fight.
That's why I think that he's going to win, is because Tavares is going to win. Is because in the moments where they don't coast, Tavares is going to be very set up. He's going to be very, ready.
And I think Theodorou is going to end up realizing that he's basically putting himself in Tavares' range. But again, like that's kind of the only way Theodorou can win is just by this methodical suffocation. And I think Tavares is going to realize that he can, just hit the guy.
Hopefully.
But who knows? Theodorou has a magic about him in the cage where he just makes people really question everything about themselves. But again, that's like Sam Alvey and Ferreira, two guys who are not the most adaptable fighters in the world.
Yeah, this is what I'm talking about. Like, these cards have a lot of funk to them. That's just like these fights where you're just like, oh man, if one guy it doesn't show up right, this is going to be a weird fight.
Mm-hmm.
Tavares opened at -102, bounced up to +140, and has since slowly fallen back down to -101. And Theodorou opened at minus 130, bounced down to minus 160, and has now slowly gone back up to minus 124. I think the odds on this fight should be dead even. I think this is going to be a nip-tuck fight where Tavares is like landing 4 more shots per round that are harder and getting rounds based only on that.
I mean, you think about it, Tavares and Theodorou are kind of the split decision kings of this division. So, like, it's not exactly a recipe for an easy-to-score fight.
No. That brings us to a light heavyweight bout. Jared Cannonier, Nick Roerich. Is this me or you? I've forgotten again.
I think it's me.
It is.
Roerich coming in on short notice. I think he's a fine addition. I'm always happy to see them adding more light heavyweights who are not, already 400 years old with 300 fights under their belts. I think that he's pretty solid and has some potential because, like, he's just sort of not a great athlete with the makings of good fundamental technique. But as it stands right now, Cannonier has those fundamental techniques. Cannonier is probably one of the better technical boxers in the division, and just doesn't have a whole game to back it up. And fortunately for him, Roerich is not an amazing takedown artist, nor is he a phenomenal grappler. And Cannonier is a really good has a really good ground game. He's very difficult at least to outwork on the ground, and probably won't need the takedown defense that has been missing in his last few fights that badly in this one. And so in that kind of fight, we have two guys, one of whom is just more practiced with the good technique, and who is also a lot more athletic, much quicker, much more powerful, and super durable as well. So I think Jared Cannonier is probably going to light Nick Roerich up and maybe get a first-round TKO.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all if Roerich gets a couple early takedowns. It's just that Cannonier's been excellent at surviving on the ground against much better fighters, and especially on like a week's notice, you can't trust Roerich to have the gas tank or the preparation to fight a long fight as it go if he can't get Cannonier out of there early. And Roerich's top game is not effective. Yeah. It's a very much like, I've taken you down and you are so unprepared to grapple that you are now overwhelmed by me being on top of you.
Right. And he's used to fighting people who panic when their back hits the ground, and that is absolutely not Jared Cannonier. So
Cannonier might get taken down a time or two early, and then he'll probably just start to pick Roerich apart until he knocks him out.
Yeah.
Odds on this, Cannonier is the favorite, opening at minus 380, jumping up to minus 250, and it's currently minus 262. And Roerich opening at plus 260, dropping down to plus 180, and now at plus 207. Those odds could stand to be wider. As far as I'm concerned, that's just my take on it.
What was your take again? Sorry.
My take is that those odds could stand to be wider than they are. Under 1.5 rounds is minus 110, over minus 120. I don't know if there's anything there, but Cannonier seems like a really safe pick here unless something really weird just happens.
I sincerely hope that Cannonier can sort out his wrestling, because he really does have the potential to be a solid contender for this division. He's got some really great skills already in place, and unfortunately, almost, and the Bosse fight that was supposed to be made wouldn't have tested this any better. But we probably won't really get to see as much of whatever improvements Cannonier may have made in this fight as we would like to.
I mean, I think we'll get to see some in that he'll have somebody who will try to out-wrestle him. That is what Roerich will try to do.
Yeah.
It's just a question, I think, of Cannonier against really good wrestlers losing the willingness to be comfortable on his back. I think that's a big part of it.
I guess what we will find out is whether Cannonier has worked in his wrestling to the point that he can stop this level of takedown.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Is he willing to actually stop somebody from wrestling him and work hard enough to stop people from wrestling him? Or does he just say, oh, well, my ground game's good enough that I don't ever have to worry about it?
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
So you hear that from fighters, you do. Yeah. You hear dudes say, like, oh, yeah, I don't like to wrestle. I work on my guard, and my guard's so good that if you take me down, That's your danger to you. And it's like, yeah, that's not how it works at the highest level, though.
Yeah, how are you gonna control the direction of the fight? How are you going to, like, once you have momentum in one phase, how are you going to keep it going if you can't wrestle?
Yeah,
it is probably I do still think wrestling is probably the most necessary MMA skill set, and it's obvious. Like, somebody as talented and as skilled as Cannonier has really been held back by wrestling and wrestling alone.
Yeah. All right, that brings us to a lightweight bout. Marc Diakiese versus Drakkar Klose. This is a great fight. I am really excited to see this. And I mean, the only thing that I have some pause about on this is that I think it's not a step back for Diakiese, but not a step forward either. Not to say that Drakkar Klose isn't better than Teemu Packalén, but that Frankie Perez fight, like, that was a serious test for Diakiese to pass. And since then, he's not really getting steps up. And I get it. He's only 24. This is actually the UFC maybe taking some time to build a prospect just a little. But it feels like that Frankie Perez win should have earned him a little bit bigger, more difficult fights. So that has me a little puzzled on this, but this is another test of Diakiese to see if he can fight somebody and while showing the understanding that that person does deserve to compete with him. And, I'm not talking about, like, not being a confident fighter, because obviously confidence is a huge part of fighting. But just Diakiese's habit of approaching fights like he could make magic happen in them. Like, that's how he fights every time, is like he's a wizard. And the other person doesn't believe in magic. And he's going to, and he's about to, like, turn them into a frog or something. Like, that's how Diakiese fights. And then it turns out that it turns out he's not a magician. He's just a very talented, athletic guy. And he can't turn people into a frog, except Teemu Packalén, God rest his soul. And so he then ends up in these really hard, tough, scrappy fights where he has to then gut his way through a bunch of difficult shit that he didn't need to do to get a win.
Or it's almost like he is a magician, but it's like if you were to see a wizard then decide to get into an arm wrestling contest with someone. Like, no, this is not what your powers were meant to do. Like, you could beat them way more easily if you didn't stoop to their level. And Diakiese always seems to get into these fights where it's like, it's always a grind. He's always got to gut it out, even though there are these moments you're like, oh my God, he's so much more gifted than this other person.
Yeah, and if he falls into that trap with Drakkar Klose, then he's gonna be in another one of these situations where it's gonna be a really tough fight. But even in that tough fight, I would pick Marc Diakiese because his game is just so much more well-rounded. Klose reminds me a bit of Mike Perry in the really good ways, not the really bad ways.
It's the teardrop tattoos that really give me that Perry vibe.
Klose has a very limited game. He's a good athlete with a very limited set of skills he's looking to implement. And he knows this, and he does them, and that is how he fights, and it is up to, and he recognizes that, and he will evolve those skills. It is a good fundamental base to build a game on, just like Mike Perry has a good fundamental base to build a whole MMA game on that base. But it's still pretty limited. And so, at range, Klose just kind of puts his head down and wings hard shots to march into the pocket. Like, he has fast hands, he's got power, he's got a good sense of timing, but he's not, like, throwing the most technical strikes as a range kickboxer. He's just sort of like winging a couple things and charging into the clinch. He's got some nice trip takedowns. He's not and some like big power slams that he can hit, but he's not a technical wrestler. He's got some decent ground and pound. He's not a great top control guy. Like, the real mastery and focal point of Drakkar Klose's game is his clinch offense. When he has you up against the fence with your back to the cage and he can put pressure on you, he's developing that Matt Browne clinch game where it's just all these little misdirections and elbow strikes. And I'm not saying he's Matt Browne yet, but that's obviously where he's looking, is to develop a really deep, evolved clinch game. And if Diakiese just marches himself into the clinch and gets caught up in that over and over again, he will put himself through a very hard fight. But I think he's a better wrestler than Klose. He's shown himself to be an incredibly gritty, tough, technical wrestler when the rubber hits the road. Like, he will do the big slam and like go with these over-the-top things that he doesn't need to do. And then he gets in that Frankie Perez fight with somebody who's a good, tough wrestler, grappler. And Diakiese just out-wrestles him, just outworks him, out-toughs him, puts a grind on him, and guts out a hard win. And that kind of ability, I think that'll get him through this close fight if he can't just use a slightly slicker, a much slicker but not much more technical range kickboxing game. Because he is slicker from range than Klose and has a better idea of keeping range and how to land and set up big power shots. But his technical game is still all over the place when he has to kickbox consistently. He just kind of throws stuff out there and sees what sticks.
Yeah. He's like, at range, Marc Diakiese, he looks like Razak Al-Hassan.
Yeah.
Where, like, huge power, obvious natural feel for distance and timing that he can just place an overhand right from 6 feet away and find the mark.
Yeah.
But the actual technique is not really there yet. It's just feel, you know, and yeah, I agree with you. Like, a close fight will, I'm avoiding making a pun on Drakkar Klose's name right now. A close fight does not, at this point, at this level, feel like something that will ever beat Marc Diakiese. Like, I think he had one fight that was contestable in Bama. I think it was maybe his fight with Jack McGann, where he really had to gut it out, and it was, he got a UD, but it maybe should have been it was a split kind of fight, you know?
Yeah.
But mostly, like, he's just an insane athlete. He's so strong. He's so powerful with his hands and his kicks. He's super explosive. He can dip into a wide range of grappling skills when he needs to, but he's also just athletic enough to power his way out of seemingly any bad position. And Diakiese is also a guy who very clearly gets tired because he does everything at 100% all the time, but it doesn't really seem to affect how effective he is in the fight. Like, he is one of the most consistent tired fighters I've seen. And while that probably won't continue to be the case as he gets older, the hope is that he will also learn some restraint.
The more tired he gets, the smarter he fights.
Yeah, yeah. It's almost like he has to burn off that first, like, 30% of his energy. The really intense part of his gas tank has to be burned off. He has to burn through the NOS before he can just go on unleaded fuel. You know what I mean? Yeah, I think that Klose is just a little too limited. I think that I wouldn't be surprised to see Diakiese beat him in his kind of fight. And then Diakiese, just being a superior athlete, really, I think has more advantages in every other phase other than that clinch. So, just Diakiese for me.
Yeah, I do love Klose's game, though. I mean, like I say, when I compare it to Mike Perry, that to me is a good thing of, like, this is somebody raw in the sport who is starting out with a firm fundamental base that they are building on and using in the right ways, and being like, I'm going to do this limited little bit of thing, and I'm going to do it really, really focus on these things I do well and keep doing them and make them better and round out my game around it. And I don't know that Perry will ever get the coaching to really make that work. But Drakkar Klose at the MMA lab probably has a better handle on rounding out his game as he goes.
Yeah, Mike Perry's probably coached by like some old Floridian named like Clancy McGowan, who lives in
half the time he's coached by what's his name's dad.
Oh God, Alex Nicholson.
Yeah, Nicholson and
I
his
forgot.
dad co-own a UFC gym, and that's where like Perry splits his training time.
Alex Nicholson's dad looks exactly like Alex Nicholson. He has like the same beard. He looks the same age. He's just a little more muscular. Florida is such a strange place.
Anyway, that brings us the odds.
I have to find a picture of his dad now.
Diakiese is at -264. There was a weird adjustment in there. Oh, I guess these odds aren't very old, I guess. Who knows? Yeah, they're a couple days old. So, yeah. Okay, Diakiese was opened at -264, so adjusted to -286. Big odds adjustment in the middle there. I don't know what that's about. Just some book opening lower and then dropping back down. And is now basically been riding even at -275. So not a lot of movement on these lines other than a spike as another book opened is my guess. And Drakkar Klose opened at +190 after some adjustment to +223. Similar dip in the middle there, and he's at +220 right now. So yeah, I don't have a big problem with those odds. I think, both guys are dangerous. Both guys have real skill areas to exploit. I think Diakiese deserves to be a decided favorite, but the fact that he puts himself into harder fights every time does make it a little difficult to make him a huge favorite.
Yeah, he needs Marc Diakiese, I think, is very clearly a guy who is badly in need of a prospect loss. Like, somebody's got to put a little fear in him, I think, for him to really reach his potential, because as it is, he makes fights way harder than they have to be.
Yeah. He treats dudes like they can't fight him. He treats guys like they can't compete. And then Lucas Sayevsky gives him a hard fight,
Yeah, I mean, Sayevsky's a good fighter. But
I knew you were going to say that, but he's not even he's 1/10 the athlete.
Right. He should not have really had all the chances he got against Diakiese.
Yeah. All right. That brings us to a welterweight bout. Dhiego Lima, Jesse Taylor. And this is you, I believe.
Dhiego Lima, man, one of the other guys I think who has really benefited. Like, watching Tough Redemption made me want to see Dhiego Lima move to elevation. I think he and TJ really seem to get along. I think he's shown some nice growth in his striking, focused a little more on, his high kicks, which I think still in MMA, head kicks are an underutilized weapon. They're sneaky. They're pretty safe to throw. You kind of have to block them or get out of the way. And so we've seen little Dwayne Ludwig tricks from Dhiego Lima on the show. And he's obviously, he's a guy who's a very good, well-rounded fighter and doesn't have a good chin. That's really the story on Dhiego Lima. And I think he's also becoming a little more confident with time, which is good. I think he's worrying less about taking shots, and often you'll find that allows people to take shots that, if they were tensing up and flinching, that would have put them away. So we're seeing some nice developments from Lima. Who knows whether or not they will actually continue to show up in the cage after The Ultimate Fighter is done, now that he's actually got a professional fight booked. But I think he's just a little too flexible stylistically for Jesse Taylor. Taylor is a really powerful wrestler, and that's basically what he does. He gets in people's faces, he takes them down, sits in half guard, and just kind of chips away. I'm sure it hurts more than it looks like it does when he's dropping these short hammer fists, because he's a very strong guy, but he's not like a really dynamic ground and pound finisher or anything. He just kind of breaks you down bit by bit. And Lima, good distance management, moves well, and has pretty solid takedown defense. It's always been, I think, an underrated aspect of his game, but he is not easy to take down. When he does get taken down, A, decent ground game, but also B, he's shown more commitment on the Ultimate Fighter to getting back to his feet, to getting back to the cage, wall walking and escaping. I think if he can do that, as long as he can defend or answer Jesse Taylor's takedowns, we will see Lima grow stronger and more confident as the fight goes on. I think we'll see a pretty close first round, a lot of clinch tie-ups, and then I think Lima will take over in the second and then even more so in the third and win this with strikes at distance.
Yeah, Lima strikes me as the kind of fighter who probably did not benefit from fighting in his brother's shadow. Because, you know, his brother's game is very predicated on, like, strong, simple fundamentals.
Yeah.
And then being able to, like, take a few shots to land a few shots and hit harder and be more powerful.
Yeah, and, like, being able to just completely scare somebody off with one clean punch. And Lima doesn't have, or Dhiego does not have that.
Dhiego does not have that. And he also doesn't, I mean, because of that, too, he doesn't have the confidence to do it. Like, that is one of the big problems with Dhiego Lima's career, has been, like, being a confident fighter and staying confident in fights, getting in trouble and being able to ride through that without his game just kind of falling apart. That was the big thing that marked his early UFC run, was that he would just, like, in fights, you know, he'd be doing all right for a little bit, and then he'd get, like, clipped a little or pushed for a while, and he would just start making these decisions where you're like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
This is going so poorly for you. The big thing for me is that Dhiego Lima has never been submitted.
Yeah.
He is a pretty decent, well-schooled grappler. Like, he and his brother, they're both good grapplers. They both know what they're doing. And Jesse Taylor, I don't know if he was throwing fights. I don't want to say that because that's an accusation, and that's, you know, I don't know if that's what he was doing in Russia, but if not, then he is Chael Sonnen to the infinite degree.
I just realized how many times Jesse Taylor has been submitted. Almost every single loss. All but one of his, 15 losses are submissions.
Yeah. Like, I'm not surprised he did really well on TUF, because he's the kind of dude who just shows up to a fight week in, week out. It's like, okay, I'm going to go wrestle this dude, and goes out and wrestles them and, like, takes them down with power, stays on them. He's only got to do that for 2 rounds in UFC exhibition, TUF exhibition bouts. These were like layups for him.
Yeah, he's got a super simple game that's really easy to stick to with no specific preparation, and a game which is actually quite challenging to prepare for if you don't have a full camp.
Yeah.
But other than that.
But watching his, like, the losses he had against Berkmanov and Saidov, like, he would get top position and control, and he would either just give it up kind of randomly, like he would just suddenly, you know, like, be on somebody's back and, like, looking to lock up a choke, and then would, like, release his hooks and totally have an open guard, and then get reversed, and then be driving in for another takedown, and the guy would have, like, one arm under his neck, and suddenly he'd be tapping. And it's just like, either you, like, this doesn't look right. This does not look like the way people should be losing fights. Like, you're a good wrestler with tons of experience, and you're just driving yourself into a random submission that most people do not get caught in.
It's a little too much like Coleman versus Valentine Overeem, that kind of territory. Like, you know how to roll, right? You know how to get out of this knee bar. Why? What? Oh, you're tapping. Okay.
And so it's either that, which, if that's the case, then, you know, I don't have much faith in him. Or he's Chael Sonnen out there, who's also got the same kind of question marks these days. And it's just like, there's a mental block when it comes to submission grappling. Like, he can do it, and he can do it offensively, but when it comes to the defensive part of it, it just, things fly apart. And they do it in a hurry. So it's really hard for me to pick Jesse Taylor in this fight. given that. It may be, too, that, you know, maybe being out fighting on the, you know, the anonymous circuit around the world doing Battleground MMA and World Series of Fighting and ACB and KSW and S70 week after week, different, you know, or month after month, different place, just whatever, just sucked his motivation away. And maybe being on TUF has rekindled that motivation and made him actually work harder on showing up for fights. We won't know until the actual fight comes around. But as it is, he's not the kind of dude who's going to knock Lima out, even at Lima's, you know, like he doesn't knock anybody out. And at that point, he's a live by the sword, die by the sword submission artist going against somebody who's never been submitted. So, Dhiego Lima is an underdog in this fight, opening at plus 185 and now at plus 163. Jesse Taylor opening at minus 265, now at minus 199, and I have to wonder if people have just never seen Jesse Taylor fight off of TUF.
Yeah. You know what, though, man? Jesse Taylor has some really respectable wins on his record.
Sure.
Like, he has a lot of somewhat embarrassing losses, but, like, he beat Tom Watson and Dennis Kang. He beat Steve Kennedy, Kendall Grove, Elvis Mutapcic. It's not like he's a guy to be overlooked. He has been putting in work all these years.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's not a bad, like, as a grappling wrestler with power, like with a power wrestling game,
yeah,
he can overwhelm a lot of people.
Yeah. Could be a problem for Lima, who's kind of spindly, but
could be, but it's
probably
just
not.
Nothing about the way he fights lately has me at all feeling that, you know?
Adaptability feels like the key in this fight, and Taylor doesn't seem to have it.
And the way he's like the amount of pressure he puts into his wrestling and the like how jacked up he is, like he can't, you know, he tires pretty quickly too. Like he's not these days, at least he doesn't, you know, watching those fights he had in Russia, like I say, I mean, either he's quitting instantly or he's getting exhausted instantly, or he's incredibly easy to submit to a degree that just doesn't make sense for a high-level fighter.
Yeah.
So I can't put any faith in that at all. And there's no props on it. Over under 2.5 rounds, but
nah.
No.
What's over? What's over 2.5? Because that seems likely, actually.
Over 2.5 is minus 215.
No, never mind.
All right.
That feels about right.
Main event now: Michael Johnson, Justin Gaethje, and yeah, this is a fascinating fight because Michael Johnson kind of shows up as a different dude every fight. Sometimes that's to match his opponent. Sometimes that is not at all to match his opponent. And certainly speed for speed, shot for shot, Johnson can crack Gaethje and hurt him. The question just the only real question is if he can't knock Justin Gaethje out, does he get sucked into this wild, uncontrolled fight where he loses his cool and just kind of starts not panic fighting, but not fighting to his strengths at all. Not doing things that are going to hurt Gaethje necessarily or win him the fight necessarily.
Yeah, not thinking. Like, yeah. I think Johnson's too emotional. He gets caught up in what's happening and stops, you know, thinking through what he's doing. And when he's thinking, he's obviously a very technical, well-rounded fighter.
I do think he can knock Gaethje out, unfortunately. I have that feeling. I know Gaethje's never been knocked out, but he's also not facing the size and speed and power of... I mean, Brian Foster's got some of that, but
yeah,
still. Foster's also kind of a weird case in and of himself. I don't think Gaethje was able to break Foster down really quickly with leg kicks in a way that I don't think he can do that to Michael Johnson. I don't think that that's going to work. I think Johnson's footwork and movement is too good for that to be an easy solution.
Yeah.
And I think that the speed difference and the accuracy difference early on is too big. Because even Gaethje, he does some amazing things I love in scrambles and in scraps. He's one of the only dudes I've ever seen who will purposefully grab a snap down headlock just so that when the person gets up, he can knee them in the face.
Yeah.
It's not, he's not doing it to get them down and keep them down. He's not doing it to set up a knee, snap them down into the knee. It's snap down, and as they stand up, he knees them. And it's a wonderful technique. But it requires things to get into, an uncontrolled mess that even he doesn't have control of.
It has to be a mess. Is Gaethje's comfortable when the fight is out of control.
Yeah.
That's why he's not like a Jessica I or even a Michael Johnson, both of whom will brawl at times. Gaethje never gets tricked into brawling or brawls because he feels he has no choice. In fact, he often tries not to and realizes the only thing he's really comfortable doing is just going to war in a crazy back and forth fight.
He's a bit like Dustin Poirier in that way.
Yeah, and even more a brawler, I think. I think Poirier has a bit of the "you cracked me, so now I throw down." That's where Gaethje, people underestimate, I think, and don't give him enough credit for how pretty his technique can be in a the thing you pointed out. There's also a sequence from one of his fights with Luis Palomino, I think the first one, where he had a collar tie, and then he drove for a knee tap off the collar tie and pushed Palomino. Palomino had to adjust his balance, which then gave Gaethje more control with the collar tie. He pulled his head down and smashed him with an uppercut, stood him up with that, and then got the takedown. This transitional ability that Gaethje has really is top-notch, but it has to be a bloody war for those things to come out.
Yeah.
Otherwise, he's the opposite of Michael Johnson. He thinks too much. And when he stops thinking and just goes, he's phenomenal.
Yeah.
But, yeah. Sorry, you had to finish still. Sorry.
I just can't trust it against this level of competition until I see it.
Right. Yeah. Same here. I think, again, like the Lad fight, I think we're going to see a real surprise for Gaethje in this first round with the speed and technical proficiency of a striker like Michael Johnson. Something he has never faced. He has never faced someone who can just snap off a left hand and get out of range that quickly. And the difficult thing for Gaethje is that unlike Lad, the consequences are going to be a lot more dire against somebody like Michael Johnson. Johnson, who is an underrated power puncher, who's super fast and accurate, a good counter puncher. There's going to be a technical gulf there when it's Johnson's kind of fight. I also think, however, that people do underestimate the effect that durability and relentlessness can have on the person who's trying to stop the durable and relentless fighter. I think that happened in Michael Johnson's fight with Nate Diaz. A big part of it was he was fighting beautifully in that first round, doing everything he needed to do. Then he started to take a few shots. And then I think realized that not only was Nate Diaz starting to edge his way into the fight, but he also just didn't care about any of the things that Michael Johnson was doing to him. He wasn't desperately trying to avoid the left hand or the leg kick. He was just answering them and answering them and answering them. And eventually the fight became one in which it was Nate Diaz, both asking and answering all the questions, and with Johnson was just kind of holding on. And so if it becomes that kind of fight, it's very easy to see how Justin Gaethje overwhelms somebody who can be kind of mentally fragile. But to get to that point, he is probably going to have to go through hell.
Yeah, and the thing is that with Nate Diaz, by that point, Nate Diaz's durability is beyond question. He's one of the most unbreakable fighters in the history of the sport.
Yeah.
Both the Diaz's are. Gaethje, he's undefeated. So certainly he hasn't been broken. But like the way he gets hurt and gets hit is not Nate Diaz out there.
No, and also like Nate may give the impression he doesn't care, but he doesn't just take punishment willy-nilly.
Yeah.
You know, like you'll hit him, he'll answer to get you to stop throwing it. And the next time you throw it or the next time he leads, he'll have a little defensive move built in to account for what you're going to probably do next. He will roll, he will pivot, he'll adjust. Gaethje's just going to kind of keep being Gaethje.
Yeah.
And man, the way that Luis Firmino was piecing him up with jabs in that last fight, that has got to give you pause coming into a fight with Michael Johnson.
Yeah, it really does. So, Johnson is the favorite. Open it plus 193, adjusted down to minus 164 in a whole hell of a hurry.
Yeah.
And has stayed now at minus 165 since then. Can't believe that Michael Johnson opened as a plus 200 underdog in this fight.
Yeah, I really want to say before we wrap up this card, I do hope Justin Gaethje wins. I think he's probably
yeah, I do too.
He's probably a better person than Michael Johnson. He's very likable, very just a simple, you know, like a Lenny type of guy, I guess. Not that he's mentally deficient, but he's just like, show up to fight. I might get knocked out, but I like to put on a show. Like, there's nothing to hate about Justin Gaethje.
Has Michael Johnson done anything worth being like disliked?
He had some domestic violence things, I think, in the past. Okay. He was a black zillion, so it's part and parcel with that team. But
fair.
And he's got like a temper. He talks shit at Dustin Poirier after knocking him out. Like,
yeah.
Justin Gaethje's exciting. He's likable, but I think he is going to run into a brick wall at least once in the beginning of his UFC career, and I think Michael Johnson might be that brick wall.
It does feel that way. Gaethje opened at minus 240 and immediately adjusted up to plus 136 and is now at plus 138. I think these odds could honestly be a little wider still. I still feel like Johnson is I'm
okay with it. I think the chances of Johnson, like if Johnson does not knock Gaethje out, it could very quickly become a Justin Gaethje fight.
Yeah, that is true. If he cannot knock Johnson out, or if Johnson cannot knock Gaethje out, then the odds on this go all wonky.
Yeah.
Let's see. Yeah, the only other thing would be fight under 1.5 is plus 140. So,
and even there, like both these dudes are super durable.
Yeah, it's that there's no guarantees there. All right, that brings us to UFC 213. We tried our best to make this fast. It did not work that well, but we tried. And starting out, Trevin Giles versus James Bochnowicz. Go after it.
Bochnowicz? I think it might be Bochnowicz.
Okay, Bochnowicz.
I'm not sure. The rules are a mystery to me with East European names.
Yeah, I mean, it's some sort of Eastern European. It probably would have been Bochnowicz at some point or something. But
it's whatever. I'll become like insensitive if I try to guess what origin this name is. Something Balkan or Slavic. Yeah. Trevin Giles is a pretty scary dude. He's got a very his game is kind of sloppy. He has a lot of developing to do, but he fights like he's Marc Diakiese. Like he does fight as if he can't be killed. And at a certain level, I think that is a really, really valuable vibe to have in a fight.
I mean, going up as a prospect, it is the way to fight.
That's the kind of the thing you look for. Like Giles is a solid athlete. He seems to have a lot of power in both hands. And he has also that feel for like timing and distance. He'll throw you off with a bit of tricky rhythm. He'll surprise you with a burst of speed. And the good news for him is that I've seen him in tough fights, and he doesn't fall apart easily. Like Diakiese, like the confidence is not fragile. It's not a veneer. And I think that is probably going to end up being the kind of deciding factor here against Bochnowicz, who is really like a relentless grappler. And doesn't have much else on Giles's level, athletically, striking-wise, wrestling. He's big and tough, but I think Giles is really going to surprise him and throw him around after the first few exchanges. So I like Giles by second round submission. Go on.
Oh, yeah, I would say more even than being a relentless grappler. Bogdanovic just seems to be one of those dudes who's he fights, like his fight method is, I will be tougher than you longer and thus win. Like,
yeah.
And because he's not a great striker, being tougher longer means that he ends up with a submission rather than knocking somebody out because he doesn't have the technique there. It's not like I wouldn't even call him a relentless grappler unless you want to talk about him relentlessly getting grappled. And then
yeah, that's fair. And I will say, like, Giles has been knocked silly in a lot of recent fights. Like, he fights like a maniac. His fight with, if you haven't seen his bout with Ike Villanueva, like, it was just those two dudes knocking each other down over and over, back and forth. But again, he does not crumble, even though he's like on rubber legs and he's fighting purely off of instinct. He comes back and keeps fighting with the same level of intensity. So I like that says a lot, I think, about where he's at as a prospect.
Yeah, I'm picking him here too. He's just a much better athlete, and he doesn't seem like he's the kind of guy who's going to gas in front of Bogdanovic and get himself tapped out, which, as you know, Bogdanovic doesn't have any knockouts. It's going anyway, that's the way it's going. So Trevin Giles is the favorite, opening at -315. These odds have been all over the place in the few days they've been open. Skewing, like sliding way down to -330 and then bouncing up to -311. So
I think he might want to consider, now that he's in the UFC, he might want to make his nickname Trevin Sean O'Connell 2.0 Giles. He's the athletic upgrade of a Sean O'Connell. Just a maniac, but he's actually athletic enough to make it work.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. And then Bogdanovic opened at +235, went up to +257, and now back down to +245. It's all fine for me for green light heavyweights. And I wouldn't pick anything off of this just because both guys are tough, and Giles could knock Bogdanovic out, or they could be a 3-round, ugly, sloppy, who knows battle where, you know, even Bogdanovic could get a submission if Giles gasses or something like that.
Probably not, though.
Probably not. I would not bet on it. I would not bet on Bogdanovic here. He seems like he's winning by being a light heavyweight on the regional scene.
Right, yeah.
That brings us to a featherweight bout. Cody Stamann,
I think.
Stamann?
Like a plant's penis.
Yeah. Cody Plant Penis.
Cody Stamann. Cody Plant Penis versus
Tyrion Ware. And this is an interesting
I can't wait for the debut of Cody the Flower Cock Stamann. What do you think?
Oh Lord, yeah.
That's
okay.
a nickname.
Cody the Flower Cock Stamann. I can't versus Tyrion Ware, and this is a fascinating fight to me because Tyrion Ware is a fascinating fighter.
Mm-hmm.
He appears to be pretty quick. Got a solid grasp, he's got solid speed, and otherwise a very underwhelming athlete. Like, not very strong. Despite having accuracy and hand speed and a few knockouts, not a power puncher, really. Like, most of his wins are decisions. He's had, a handful of knockouts for somebody who boxes as much as he does in his fights. And a crafty guard game and a crafty wrestling game that you wouldn't expect.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
he's kind of my favorite fighter ever. Like,
yeah,
like you saw Tyrion Ware fight, and you're like, this is the type of dude that Connor Rebush absolutely roots for.
You know what it is? And I think I have it nailed. He fights like a guy that only spars.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Like, doesn't drill, doesn't, or, maybe hits pads and maybe goes through and, like, does some drilling, but doesn't really drill a lot. Just doesn't lift weights or anything like that. Just spars really well a lot. And, like,
also like a guy who can't get enough sparring at his MMA gym, so he's constantly going to, like, local boxing gyms and getting work in with good boxers. Like, he's just, like, crafty and experienced and unbreakably calm.
Yeah, and he's been fighting. He hasn't been fighting very long. He started his MMA career in 2012. Yeah. So he's only 5 years in, but he has fought a shitload in those 5 years.
21 times in 5 years is crazy.
Yeah. And so he really is he's like this journeyman boxer that only spars to get work in, and is in 5 years created this really crafty veteran game where he's not unbelievable at anything. He's not an overwhelming force as a striker. He's not an overwhelming force as a wrestler. He's not an overwhelming grappler. But he can do all of them functionally and fundamentally solidly. The question here is Cody Flower Penis a good enough athlete to beat Tyrion Ware? Because Stamen is a bricked up shithouse who has really solid power in his hands and a good, like, tight little inside boxing game, and just seems like he's destined to be he kind of seems, I don't know what his wrestling background is. He's from Michigan, so he has to have wrestled. Yeah, he was involved in wrestling and started boxing when he was 16. And he seems like he's just kind of like he seems like who's the guy suspended from Team Alpha Male?
Chad Mendes?
Yeah. He seems like Chad Mendes. Like, it's a similar kind of approach.
Yeah. Obviously not with the same level of wrestling ability, but
not the same level of wrestling ability, but also you got to remember that what the style that Alpha Male teaches, not that he's an Alpha Male fighter, is takedown immediately works towards a submission or a little bit of ground and pound, and then you stand back up.
Yeah.
Like, Chad Mendes was never the dude to just sit on top of somebody and, like, be a top control wrestler.
If he had been, he might have beaten Conor McGregor. Exactly.
But no, in that Conor McGregor fight, he would go for something, it wouldn't work, and he would, like, stand to back out and let Conor McGregor back up and reset.
Yeah.
And so Stamen is kind of that kind of fighter. Like, he might go get a takedown, and then he's just going to, like, work for something and reset. He's got a good, powerful boxing game. He looks like an athlete that can really, like, fight through some adversity and just turn it on people. Like, if you start to crumble, it doesn't matter that you're hitting him. He will just march you down and continue to beat you until you go away. And that may be the kind of dude that, like, that level of athlete just may be what beats Tyrion Ware. Because Tyrion Ware, for all of his, like, slick well-roundedness and his well-defined game that he's built, does not have many wins over, like, name wins over good athletes. Like, he doesn't have many name high-level wins at all. Like, he beats a lot of other, like, good, solid regional journeyman fighters, things like that. But his losses are to guys Joe Soto, Luke Sanders, Leandro Higo, all good fighters, but maybe also an athletic tick above him.
Yeah.
And I'm I'm going to go out and take Stamen here just because I think he's too big and too powerful for Ware, who isn't dominating enough anywhere despite having a very slick technical game everywhere.
Yeah. The thing is, the one thing I think that needs to be pointed out is that in Ware's losses are not just guys who are better athletes than him. They're almost all good wrestlers and grapplers. Like, that is how he loses, right? Ware really looks like boxing is the thing he likes to do the most. And I have never seen someone outstrike him.
That's fair. All right, so Connor's gone. Oh, he's back. Yeah, I didn't even fill the void of your silence this time. He should be.
I'm getting real good at hopping back on very quickly. So I've never seen anyone outstrike Ware, because when you consent to box with him, you start playing his game, and he has that sort of veteran craftiness where he just like on the fly figures things out. He's very much a young veteran. Like,
yeah. This is
the guys that
your George Masvidal pick.
Yeah, this is one of those guys more in his youth. And it's crazy because you look at these two guys together. You look at Tyrion Ware and you look at Cody the Flowercock Stamen, and obviously they haven't had that different a number of fights. And you could even say by some metrics Stamen is more experienced. I think he's been fighting a little longer. But Stamen looks like the raw prospect still to a degree that Ware does not. Ware looks like a really experienced fighter, even though he's not. Well, he is, but he's not been fighting that long.
Yeah. So
I think what my question in this matchup is, and we're talking about this too long, I guess, but this is actually a really fascinating fight.
It is.
My question here is whether Cody, Pedal Dick Stamen can. I'm going to keep coming up with new ones. Cody the Pedal Dick Stamen can consistently wrestle Tyrion Ware and out-wrestle him. And if he can't do that, then I think a game that's really built on his athletic prowess may make it difficult for him to outstrike Tyrion Ware without a knockout. Because you see in Stamen's fights, in Cody Blossom Hog Stamen, he kind of runs out of ideas from time to time. You'll see long stretches of nothing happening. He'll get somebody down, won't really get a ton done. Like, he kind of feels like he's in control even when he's not getting anything done. And Ware doesn't ever consent for that. Ware is always seizing control when he can get it. He tends to put pressure on. He tends to sway in, take a shot in his forehead, and counter with 4 punches. Not a lot of power, but takes a punch well. And as long as you are not holding him down, pretty difficult to outpoint on the feet. So I think that Stamen is probably going to have some big moments early. I think he's going to crack Ware, and I think he'll probably get him down. But if he slows down a bit after that, or if he starts to kind of lose the momentum and start to coast a bit, I think Ware is going to work his way back into this. I think he may actually get a TKO in like the 3rd round, or just sort of I'm expecting him to kind of flurry and overwhelm Stamen for the last like minute of the fight and really put on he's like a Neil Seery kind of fighter, you know? Just a gritty kind of a comeback performance. So,
it's a fascinating fight that I'm really interested in.
Yeah, but again, take that with a grain of salt, because obviously Tyrion Ware is the type of fighter that I automatically love. So, yeah, Zane's probably right.
All right. I may not be. But anyway, odds on that fight we talked way too long about, and we're going to have to make up time on other fights. Stamen is the favorite, opening at -270, dropping to -299, and then back up slowly to -277. Ware opening at +190, jumping up to +240, and dropping back to +223. I do not think the odds should be that wide on this at all. Ware is really actually crafty everywhere.
Yeah.
And Stamen is still, like, he does look raw still. He does seem a bit raw, and Ware's never been finished by strikes. So
right. And he did lose to Luke Sanders, but again, Luke Sanders is a really solid, well-developed fighter. Also, he went 5 rounds with him and didn't get finished. So, we at least know that Ware is super tough.
Yeah. So, Over 2.5 is minus 240. Unfortunately, that doesn't really seem to offer anybody anything. And otherwise, I don't know. This is just going to be a really close fight.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
I am too. A lot, actually. All right. Brings us to a bantamweight bout. Rob Font, Douglas Silva de Andrade, and go ahead.
I know you're excited about this one, and I think
I want to talk about this a lot, but we can't.
Watching the tape, some of your enthusiasm for Douglas De Silva is kind of infectious because he really is an interesting fighter to watch.
He's so fucking weird.
Yeah, he has sort of like an Azuma Nelson thing going on where he's like really stiff and jittery and doesn't look like comfortable or fluid, that it kind of makes him harder to fight because he doesn't really have the same rhythmic tells that most natural looking athletes do. Like a really sudden burst of speed out of this weird stock still stance. Really great timing on counter punches. And while I was worried about De Silva coming into the UFC because of, he basically crushed cans for most of his career in Brazil, he's had some tough fights where he's taken shots. And like the fight with Henry Browne was super tough, just kept coming, kept putting knuckles on his face. And he didn't break the way you might expect a guy who has feasted on tomatoes his entire career to break. He hung in there and knocked Browne out, which, is also a thing that Cody Garbrandt couldn't do. Like, it shows how dangerous he is as a striker. I do think that Font is going to be more fluid, and with his reach advantage and his more integrated game, I think that might be just too much of a hurdle for Andrade to overcome, because I think he really needs someone to be coming into his range all the time to be effective. And while Font does that early in fights, and if his fight with Matt Schnell is any indication, he really can be caught with counters as he's stepping into the pocket. He is a really good adapter. He moves well. He has a lot of options and will just change things up on the fly if something isn't working. And Andrade is kind of locked into what he does well. So I like Rob Font to get a decision, but De Silva's a live dog to me.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing with Silva is that he's just a phenomenal athlete. Like, that's how he gets away with being a lot of the weirdness to him.
Yeah.
Is it? He's one of those fighters that you watch him long enough in any fight, and you're just like, wait a minute, how the hell did he just do that? Like,
yeah,
I don't understand how you did this athletic feat that you've just performed here, because it's actually a lot more absurd than it looks.
He's like if like a concerned coach was actually watching all of Oluwale Bangboja's sparring sessions and like making corrections, you would get Douglas De Silva.
Yeah. And yeah, it makes him a very tough fighter to face. The big problem here for him with Font is that Font is really solid at sticking to fundamentals and hitting really hard. And he's a good enough athlete to make that work for him in a way that Henry Browne couldn't against another good athlete, On De Silva just doesn't have enough. There's not enough consistency to any part of his game to make me feel like he could do to Rob Font what somebody like John Lineker did to Rob Font, where you just constantly take him out of his game, put him on the back foot, and make him hesitate on everything and fade out of the fight. And otherwise, if you're giving him space and time to work, Font does well to wrestle. He does well to grapple. He's not bad anywhere. And then he hits really hard with a consistent, polished, very simple fundamentals kickboxing game. And I think it's probably going to be too much for Douglas De Silva.
But we will both be cheering if De Silva catches him with a big shot on the way in, which really could happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Because De Silva, it's great to see somebody who's a phenomenal athlete just be weird as hell. Like,
yeah, that's why I like him, because like most of the phenomenal athletes are like these top prospects. They never seem to face any adversity. De Silva is like he's his own worst enemy because his style is so bizarre that he doesn't get to always take advantage of how crazy athletic he is.
Yeah, I mean, all that time, and his can crushing record is actually, it's not as can as you would think. It's not
the worst.
Bad. But that was all him training in his backyard. It wasn't like some dude going from a big gym to like feast on like pad his record against local whatever. It was him literally weightlifting in his backyard and then going to fight people on weekends, you know?
Douglas Da Silva would be a terror if you were in the same prison as him. Like, he would just be a dude getting strong in his cell who just without any coaching could just fuck up every single dude he comes across. He's a lot of fun, man. I really, I don't know. There's something just attractive about his style that he's a lot of fun.
It is. It's fun. I would love to talk about it more, but we can't. All right. Odds on that fight. Douglas Silva de Andrade is the underdog, opening at plus 165, adjusted up to plus 225, and slowly rising to plus 256. Rob Font at minus 215, adjusted down to minus 276, and slowly sliding out to minus 327. I think that's getting a little wide, honestly. Like, Font, his game it's powerful and it's it's diverse, but it's also sort of like he's kind of the more athletic Terrion Ware without being as good a boxer, where it's like he does everything all right, but he's not a top level fighter at anything.
No. And the guys he's beaten have not been people like at the best of their games, you know?
Yeah. And with somebody like Briones, who is also, or with Silva de Andrade, who is a top athlete with a funky, weird game and a finisher, like I wouldn't, I'd bet on Font, but it's gonna be a weird fight.
Yeah, honestly, like both these guys are kind of overlooked in a burgeoning bantamweight division, but Da Silva, for most people, I think gets the short end of the stick. He's a really dangerous fighter.
Yeah.
And one who is put together pretty well. So
under 2.5 rounds, this might be interesting in a fight where both guys tend to finish when they win.
Yeah. What are the odds on that?
Plus 120.
Under 2.5. Yeah, that might be something to go for, though. I mean, both dudes have a lot of power. Both guys like to finish in a lot of different places. Boy, that sounded like some kind of sexual innuendo.
Well, whatever.
I got Cody Stamen on my mind still.
All right. That brings us to Jordan Meehan versus Bilal Muhammad, and one of the most funk-filled funk fights on this funk card.
Yeah. Is it me?
No, this is me.
Okay, thank God.
So Jordan Meehan should be able to win this fight, frankly. Muhammad is... what we saw in Randy Browne, I think that said a lot more about the problems in Randy Browne's game than it did about Bilal Muhammad. Because, Muhammad, he won. He won by kicking Browne apart and boxing him up in the pocket. But being able to, be a reasonable kickboxer has not been Muhammad's problem. So much as it is, if he gets into a really tough scrap, having the durability to survive or being able to implement his game against a more polished striker who isn't just going to let him wade in the ways that Randy Browne did, or isn't just going to let him kick them apart the way Randy Browne did. And Jordan Meehan is a much more polished kickboxer. Jordan Meehan has power. He has a really well-built power kickboxing style when it's on. He also seems like kind of a quitter. And if he doesn't knock Muhammad out, it's hard to say where he's going to end up in this fight. I'm going to pick Jordan Meehan here. I feel weird and bad about it because I don't think that Muhammad has enough parts to take Meehan out of his game, but I'm also not sure what takes Meehan out of his game anymore. I think I think you have to hurt Jordan Meehan and pressure, bully him to break him out of his game in a way that I don't know that Muhammad can. At least not without eating enough power shots to get himself hurt.
Yeah.
But if he can, if Muhammad can go after me and if he can start to, if he can land some good body shots, clip him a little, make this fight messy and survive it, there's a very good chance that Mian just gives up.
Yeah. And as for me, I kind of see that happening. And I think, I mean, Mian, he knocked out Mike Pyle, who is like the chinniest man on earth at the moment, unfortunately. He knocked out Dan Miller. He's not been putting away people, again, who are really at their best in recent fights. And I really just kind of think that what makes him fold, I mean, maybe he gets tired. He seems to gas a little more easily these days. Maybe it's just a lot of wear and tear. He's young still, but he's had a crazy career with a ton of fights against a lot of very good fighters. And I think maybe that it just turns into a fight and he doesn't like it.
Yeah, that's what I think. It's just when things get to be like, when something becomes messy and hard, he's just like, this isn't what I wanted. I wanted this to look great. And
yeah.
Nah, you're going to try and take me, fine, whatever. I'll just let you take me down.
Yeah, and I think the one tactical opening for Muhammad there that I caught onto in the Emil Weber make fight with Mian was how easy it was to kick him. His kick defense was not top notch. He got his legs and body kind of chewed up. And if Muhammad comes into this and just does what he did to Randy Browne and doesn't get knocked out, and I think it is less likely that Mian knocks him out than, say, Vicente Luque, who seems to have a shitload of power in his hands, then I think Muhammad is just going to be consistent enough to make Mian uncomfortable and get him basically to look a lot worse in rounds 2 and 3 than I'm sure he will in round 1. So
yeah, it could easily happen. I'm just kind of banking on, like, the guys who beat Mian, Emil Weber Meek, Thiago Alves, Matt Brown, Tyron Woodley. They're, Woodley, obviously, I mean, that was a split decision of all things. But especially like Alves, Brown, Meek, they're kind of dudes who have a tendency to, especially in a kickboxing fight, if things start to get difficult, they're willing to get a little crazy.
Yeah.
And I don't know that Muhammad has that.
I have a little faith in it. I mean, he took some shit from Alan Jouban without backing down. I mean, if he doesn't go unconscious, I think he can dig in and fight back if he needs to. And I mean, the other thing that would add to your point is that also all those guys you named are really good athletes.
Yeah.
Everyone except Matt Brown is a really explosive fighter. Matt Brown has a ton of power and is super tough. So, Muhammad doesn't have that. He's a little more restrained with his style and likes a slower paced kind of fight. But I just don't have a ton of faith in Jordan Mian these days.
I don't either. All right. Mian is the underdog, opening at -105, adjusting up to +125, and staying there, finally dropping just a day ago or so down to +119 from +136. So it seems like a little bit of late line movement on Jordan Mian. And Bilal Muhammad opening at -135, dropping down to -150, riding that all the way up until that same moment where he suddenly went up to he was at -160 and went up to -140, where he is right now.
I'm okay with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know that I would otherwise take look at any props on that or anything.
Nah. Too funky.
That brings us to a middleweight bout: Thiago Santos versus Gerald Meerschaert.
Since we're in the habit now of coming up with nicknames, I'm going to dub Gerald Meerschaert Gerald the Double-Edged Sword Meerschaert, because I think
that's way less ring. It has way less ring to it than Flowercock.
Than Flowercock or Pedal Dick or Blossom Hog, which you seem
Blossom
to
Hog. Like, really, obviously, we should send that to him.
You should take that one into consideration. Yeah, Meerschaert. The thing with Meerschaert is, like, what makes him really good is kind of what makes him incapable of breaking through and becoming an elite fighter.
Yeah.
He's obviously part of, depending on how you define the elite, Meerschaert is obviously among the best middleweights in the world. He's very solid. But in the real upper echelon, I don't think he's ever going to be able to get there because he's just kind of Ed Herman slow and methodical. He's got a very, it almost looks like he's like lazy with his technique sometimes. And you realize like, oh, this guy's actually a pretty well-trained striker. And he can pick off a good counter or take an angle if he needs to. He's just so slow. And that also comes to like how many punches he's willing to throw. He doesn't seem to pick up the pace much. And so that means
Cody McKenzie, if McKenzie had like stayed in fight camps and not been crazy.
Yeah. And even then, like McKenzie may be a little more speedy when he steps in with a punch than Meerschaert.
It's true. It's true.
Which, you know, so, you know, Meerschaert, he's super composed. It's very difficult to rattle him. And he's had a long career, fought a lot of top guys, you know, a lot of other very experienced fighters. And so he's got this really deliberate style. It's difficult to shake him out of it, but it's also difficult for him to shake out of it, which, you know, like he can't change it willingly either. And so really athletic opponents, I think, have opportunities to surprise him, to catch him with something that comes quicker than he is physically able to avoid it. He just doesn't have that athletic ability. And I think that is Thiago Santos. There's obviously a window of opportunity here for Meerschaert. If he's really aggressive with the ground game, or if he manages to capitalize on a mistake. Santos has had some problems on the ground. He's obviously working on it. But you've got to imagine that Meerschaert would have a big edge in the submission grappling game. He's got like 19 submissions to his name. That's what he does. But Meerschaert, again, I don't think he can turn on that kind of aggression that easily. And even if he does get to that point where he is really forcing the ground game on Santos, he's going to have to go through like 3 or 4 minutes of dealing with this insane athletic kickboxer in front of him. And I think it's going to be enough for Santos to win. I think he's really going to catch Meerschaert with something big relatively early in the fight. Maybe Meerschaert will survive, but at some point it's going to be like the Jack Marshman fight. Like it might get a little dicey. Santos never seems to have a perfectly easy fight if he doesn't get the early KO, but he maintains that athletic edge throughout. So I like Santos by first or second round knockout.
Yeah, the difficult thing with this fight to me is honestly that Santos is a very absurdly willing wrestler.
Yeah.
And so there's a very high likelihood that he lands 2 or 3 hard shots on Meerschaert and then takes him down.
Yeah.
Goes right into his guard and tries to like open up a good ground and pound game.
Yeah.
But Meerschaert is actually a really, really good guard grappler. Like he gets a bunch of submissions from guard, arm bars, triangles, sets him up really well. He's a great scrambler, funky fighter there. So there's a real chance that Thiago Santos puts himself into a submission early and loses.
Yeah. And there's also, I can't envision anyone taking and surviving like the head kick that Thiago Santos landed on Steve Bosse or someone, you know, like no one can take those shots, but it is worth pointing out that if it's not the perfect shot, Gerald Meerschaert has, despite a very long career, never been knocked out.
Yeah.
He's super tough. So
it may be, too, that like it's just Meerschaert taking a round of hellacious punishment and then turning this fight around as it goes on.
Yeah, forcing letting Thiago, letting Santos turn it around for him, you know?
Yeah, if Santos like gasses and then only wants to wrestle from there on out and just keeps getting out grappled over and over again.
Yeah.
I could easily see that. So I'm leaning Santos for the early KO too, but the way he fights, it's, man, is he hard to trust.
Mm-hmm.
It's just Meerschaert, like he's so dependent on like part of it too. Like one of the reasons I like to compare it to Cody McKenzie is that he's so dependent on being like a good movement defensive striker. That he's not fast enough to be that.
Right.
That it's just like, yeah, okay, that like little like head dip thing you did is really nice and slick, except that, like
since I was like doing research for this fight, I've had this image in my mind of Meerschaert from well, let's see, which fight was it? He fought Joe Gigliotti and in his UFC debut, and he like thought about a kick and then changed his mind. But he was standing like 3 feet away from Giuliani. He was so close. And like he slowly put the knee down and kind of leaned away. There was like a 3-second window where if it was like a Thiago Santos kind of fighter, he would have gotten hit with 4 shots right on the chin. Like he's just not fluid enough or quick enough with those defensive movements.
Yeah.
He kind of hangs out in a bad position too often. But Santos does that on the ground. So
yeah. It's going to be an interesting fight. All right, that brings us to the odds on that fight. Thiago Santos is the favorite at opening at plus 120 and dropping down to minus 125. He's now at to minus 153. Meerschaert opening at minus 160. So these odds have totally reversed. Adjusted up to plus 100 and slowly drifting to plus 128.
Who opened Meerschaert at such big favorite odds?
I don't know.
Like I like Gerald Meerschaert. I think he's legit, but that's a little confusing.
It is, and it eventually pretty quickly got corrected out by other lines and bettors.
Some bookies lost some money on that one.
Let's see, that brings us now to a welterweight bout: Chad Laprise versus Brian Camozzi, and so. Brian Camozzi is kind of like the ultra cut rate Drakkar Klose.
Yeah.
Except that he has a guard grappling game that does him very few favors at high levels.
He's Chris Camozzi's brother. I mean, that's all you need to say. He seems like Chris Camozzi.
He is a hyper aggressive grappler. Like he's much fleeter of foot than Chris Camozzi, who one of the major problems with Chris Camozzi is being an amazingly foot slow dude.
Yeah, he's kind of a hyper aggressive everything that Chris does.
Yeah. But he's not athletic, particularly. He's not particularly strong or a great athlete. And he's not a defensively sound range striker. And unfortunately, he doesn't really seem to have a process for getting into the clinch. It's just sort of push his way into it over and over. And against somebody as tough as Chad Laprise, who's hard to take down, hard to grapple. He's never been submitted. Hard to make that guard grappling game work. Hard to push around standing. I don't trust Brian Camozzi to get the clinch over and over and over and dominate there. And otherwise, I think he's just going to be getting picked off. So I'm taking Chad Laprise by what might be a mildly ugly decision if he can't knock Camozzi out and is just sort of like slowly picking Camozzi off at range.
Yeah. Yeah, there's Camozzi's aggressive. That's a good thing about his game. He's quite hittable because he's not a great athlete and doesn't seem to have a lot of defensive techniques. But he can be pretty relentless.
Yep. And
he's got as a striker, like whether it's clinch, kicking, boxing, he's got a fairly well-rounded game. He can do everything pretty well. And to his advantage, he'll be 5 inches taller than Chad Laprise, and his arms are 5.5 inches longer.
Yeah, so that could be a big advantage if he can turn that into some real leverage.
Yeah, that's something. The difference, I think, is going to be the speed of Chad Laprise. Laprise is not like a hulking athlete by any description, but he's very quick, especially his hands. He has like Michael Johnson hand speed and very quick kicks as well. And is just a really technically sound fighter. That is, I've often described Chad Laprise, like he may not have the athleticism Faraz would like to have in his ideal fighter, but his kickboxing is like the Faraz Zahabi kickboxing ideal. He relies heavily on footwork. He counterpunches. He works behind a jab. He feints. He's got a great variety to his offensive output. It's just very difficult to out-tactic Chad Laprise on the feet. He will figure out what you're doing to him. And when you're in there with a fighter with similar levels of athleticism, like the Ross Pearson fight, you get a really fun back-and-forth tactical battle. In other fights, when the person is maybe a little more hittable, a little more foot slow, you often get a highlight for Chad Laprise. I think the latter is more likely here. I like Bryan Camozzi. I think he does have some potential. He's not being matched very forgivingly in the UFC so far, though. And I think that Chad is probably going to like hit him with one of those quick counter right hands and really put him on Queer Street early in the fight. Also, Chad Laprise fought Brian Barberena, which a win that looks a lot better in retrospect. He really took Brian Barberena apart for 3 rounds, and Barberena is very solid. But Barberena, I watched that fight because he was the other guy on Laprise's ledger who was like as tall as Bryan Camozzi, and Laprise's main weapon was head kicks. So it's not like his game falls apart just because someone is tall. He will still kick Bryan Camozzi in the face if he gets the chance.
It is worth noting that Bryan Camozzi was supposed to face Alan Jouban here.
Right. Like, what are they doing to the guy?
Like, why not just have, like, you know, Sean Shelby tie Bryan Camozzi to a chair with a bat in the cage and just, like, hit him for 5 minutes if that's all you want to do to the guy.
Yeah, they're just sacrificing him, man. Like, I don't know. The Camozzi clan cannot catch a break from UFC level matchmaking.
No. All right. That brings us to a heavyweight that brings us to the odds. Odds. Chad Laprise opening. He opened at -300, is now at -573.
Ooh, that's too wide, but whatever.
That is too wide, but whatever. Bryan Camozzi opening at +220, now to +420. It is worth noting that Chad Laprise did lose his fight to Ross Pearson and got knocked out by Francisco Trinaldo. Trinaldo especially being a athletic step above both guys being athletic steps above Bryan Camozzi.
But you know, like, it's Chad Laprise. Like, when should Chad Laprise ever be up -500? And Camozzi is, like, if he doesn't finish Camozzi, Brian's hella scrappy. He's not going to back down from a fight.
No, I mean, Chad Laprise's only knockout since 2011 is his last one against Thibault Gouti.
Yeah. He's going to have a fight in his hands if he can't get the finish. So I cannot countenance those odds.
Yeah. The odds are really wide on Laprise. Even though we don't think that he's going to lose to Camozzi, they're still really wide.
Yeah.
All right. That brings us to a heavyweight bout. Travis Browne versus Alexei Oleinik. And is this me? Let's see. You. This is you.
Okay. Neither of us are very good at keeping track of it now. Oh, boy. Travis Browne. This fight is just a bummer to me. Everything about it just...
Beat it up, then. Don't get too far into it.
Okay. Oleinik still has an Ezekiel choke game, but other than that, I think he is very markedly slowing down. He's had a bajillion fights. He's 40 years old now, taking a lot of shots, and has always relied on a bizarre, esoteric sort of ground game to get his wins. As long as Travis Browne can continue the improvements he showed against Derek Lewis, as long as he can like stick to something resembling a kicking game, control distance, and not allow Oleinik, who is a really plodding, slow fighter, to close the gap on him, he should be able to pick him apart. And I even have a strong feeling that we may see the return of Travis Browne's elbows if Oleinik, desperate for a takedown, gets stalled out against the fence and just gets his temple smashed in. So I like Travis Browne, provided he still has something left, and I think he probably does. I like Travis Browne by second round TKO.
Yeah, Oleinik doesn't look like he's really in fight shape anymore.
No.
Like that fight with Pesta just kind of like gave him the same choke over and over again until he got it.
Yeah, Pesta clearly didn't know he was even working on a choke when that happened.
Yeah.
He mounted and was like, oh shit, this is the thing he has me in. Like, I had no idea. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I mean, granted, Travis Browne is working with Edmund Tarverdyan, so...
But there was something in that Derek Lewis fight. There was some glimmer of the old Travis Browne.
It's true. I know. I picture Edmund on the sidelines, like, "No, Travis, mount, put your head next to his head, put your head next to his."
He's just grabbing your neck. He's a pussy. Mount. Yeah. Edmund, if anyone could convince Travis Browne to get Ezekiel choked by Alexei Oleinik, it is Edmund Tarverdyan.
Yeah. Otherwise, Oleinik he doesn't seem to have much of a gas tank. He's had knee injuries.
Yeah.
And I don't think that he can beat Travis Browne. I don't see that happening. I mean, hey, here's a fun fact. Travis Browne has never been submitted.
Yeah.
He's too big and strong. He's actually one of the rare heavyweights that actually has a gas tank. I mean, for all the criticism you can lob at Travis Browne, as a 6'7" dude, he fights for, he can fight for 25 minutes. And unless he gets choked out in 2 minutes doing something dumb, he should have this.
I mean, he's definitely still at his best in the first 5, but he can if he needs to. And Oleinik, I think your comment, that's really all you can just say, is that these days Alexei Oleinik does not look like he's in fight shape.
Yeah.
And Browne still does.
Yeah. Oleinik opened at plus 140, now to plus 179. Travis Browne opened at minus 180, now to minus 221. I mean, I don't want to say those odds seem narrow, but they seem narrow.
Yeah. But you know the rule.
I know the rule. I actually had somebody tell me that heavyweight is one of the more predictable, like statistically safer betting divisions out there. And maybe they're right. Who am I to ignore numbers and data? When I feel like breaking down the fights, it always just feels like weirdness.
Yeah, I think it's also heavyweight has a like perpetual Bellator vibe about it, where like Bellator events shock you because you just like kind of too bummed out and confused by the card to put a lot of like analytical thought into it. Like it's just difficult to see through the fog and figure out why you're supposed to care. And when you don't care, anything surprises you. You're like, oh, like there's no way I would have seen that coming. So it's just that heavyweight is Bellator and Bellator is bizarre. And that's all there is.
That's fair. All right. That brings us to a lightweight bout, Anthony Pettis versus Jim Miller. Love this fight.
Yeah.
I think it's exactly a great fight to make for the lightweight division. For Anthony Pettis coming back up, I'm glad Anthony Pettis is coming back to lightweight. I think that the moment you saw him step on the scale, all the talk from all the years about like, oh, Anthony Pettis should drop to featherweight, immediately seemed like the dumbest thing.
Yeah. And even the moment he announced that he was going to go to featherweight, I was like, that is not the big source of your problems at 155. Like, yeah, he can be held in place and stuff, but it's not been gigantic muscular freaks controlling him that has really been his issue.
No. So to that end, this Jim Miller fight, I think this is a really good fight for Anthony Pettis. I think this is a good matchup for him, and a better matchup than maybe people might think who see Pettis having trouble with wrestling and having trouble, keeping his back off the cage, because Jim Miller will come after people. He likes to pressure. He likes to throw. He's a good wrestler. He's also a incredibly non-static grappler. Like, Jim Miller is not the dude who's just going to like get a position and now he's in position and he's going to stay there.
Yeah.
He's a dude who, if he gets a position, he will work for a submission and he will start a scramble and the scramble will get going and maybe he'll win that scramble, maybe he won't. And Pettis, for all his wrestling faults, is an incredible scrambling grappler.
Yeah.
Like, really, watching him sweep Charles Oliveira time after time after time, is a reminder. It's like, oh yeah, if you actually have to just grapple with somebody, you're really good at this.
Or submitting Ben Henderson. Like, yeah. Yes. Anthony Pettis has a very legit ground game that it's not assertive enough for it to seem like a big part of his game. But if you put him in that world, he's very good at it.
Yeah. And then as striker, like matching up as strikers, Jim Miller's striking continues to like be tight, maybe even evolve a little.
Mm-hmm.
He's becoming a more varied combination puncher. But I don't think he's still really prepared to deal with Pettis's speed and power at range. You know, in a way, like even that Dustin Poirier fight showed at times with Poirier able to nail Miller with a lot of hard shots in that bout. I think Jim Miller will have moments of success, but I think that too much of his game revolves around putting himself in too much danger in ways that Pettis is very good at capitalizing on. Like Jim Miller at his best is never putting on a consistently controlled performance. You know, it's always letting things get just a little out of control and then being able to be the one to capitalize on that being out of control.
Yeah, because they're kind of opposites. Like you watch Jim Miller, it's a very hard fight for me to call. I keep flip-flopping on it. You watch Jim Miller fight, and he's just like, he's really good at everything. And you can just tell that the fact that he's kind of a small lightweight and not a phenomenal athlete, like that's the big thing holding Jim Miller back. Because even now, like he's heading out of his prime. Probably he's been doing this a very long time. He has the most submission attempts in UFC history. He has the most lightweight fights in UFC history, tied with Gleison Tibau. And if Thiago Alves had made weight for their fight, he would have the most lightweight UFC fights at 26. He's been around the block quite a few times, and over the course of that time has just basically picked up a perfectly well-rounded MMA game. And the real thing that continues to hold him back is that he just can't like explode his way out of a bad position or quickly recover from throwing a left hand to instantly sprawl in a takedown. Once he gets going with one thing, he's invariably vulnerable to others because he cannot just turn on a dime the way the truly elite athletes can. And so you have to wonder how that matches up. This like game that is just really fundamentally sound and not boosted by any athletic ability with a game like Anthony Pettis's, who is like missing a ton of fundamental techniques, but it is really, really dangerous because of how athletic he is. And you have to wonder too, how much that may have been diminished, because Anthony Pettis, I think he's still trying new things, but with the punishment he's taken, with being finished for the first time, and, you know, having all these difficult fights, even the fight with Charles Oliveira, and then adding the weight cuts into that equation, I think he's probably getting worse. It doesn't mean he's done, but I think he's getting worse. And Jim Miller, I think, is still getting better, very slowly, inch by inch, but I think he's still improving his game. He's still learning. He's still tightening up his technique. The Jim Miller who fought even just like 4 years ago would have been knocked out by Dustin Poirier. I believe that. And the fact that he was able to hang in there, keep a tight defense, stay active, and hit Poirier, like steal a chance every now and then just to scare him off or try to hurt him while he was being attacked and swarmed, and that he built to the point where he was taking Poirier's legs away by the end of the fight, like that's a solid striker for a guy who's known as a submission grappler. There's a lot to like there. So the question is, how assertive, I think, can Jim Miller be? Because I think if he could basically take a page out of Rafa dos Anjos' book, be like an aggressive southpaw who every time Anthony Pettis kicks, he just kicks him right back, who puts him against the fence, who throws combinations, I think he can win that kind of fight, especially when you add in the fact that, when Jim Miller is in control of the initiative, he can set up and finish a good takedown. It doesn't really need to out-grapple Anthony Pettis on the ground. He just needs to steal a few minutes at a time while controlling the pace of the striking. But if he can't do that, then some of his problems are going to come to the fore, right? Like people who have really athletic kicking games, they've given Jim Miller problems in the past. Donald Cerrone did, you know? People who kick hard to the body have consistently given Jim Miller problems. Very rarely does he fold, but I've seen him hurt by a lot of body shots, especially from strong kickers and people with good knees. Those are things Anthony Pettis can do well. So to me, I think it just comes down to like intangibles. I think Jim Miller has a little more career momentum at this point, and I think he's still getting better. I think he's maybe even got more confidence than ever before, because now he's kind of sorted out the Lyme disease issue, at least as best as he can. And I think Anthony Pettis has got to still be asking himself questions. He's a very tough dude. He's pretty Tony. He's got the pretty style. Anthony Pettis never gets enough credit for how ridiculously tough he is. He can fight hard if he needs to fight. He can take a hell of a beating without breaking, and he continues to come back and try his best despite, a really bad run that is completely at odds with what we expected from him when he was on the way up. But it's got to take a toll. And I have this feeling that Jim Miller is just in a better place right now, that he's going to seize the fight more consistently than Anthony Pettis will, and that just controlling the pace, controlling the range, never letting Anthony Pettis breathe, that could be his window to a victory.
Yeah, I mean, if Jim Miller can show up the way he did against Thiago Alves,
right,
then that's the game plan.
Yeah, and I think we see a lot of that from Jim Miller these days. Like, the distance in his fights is closer. His defense is sharper, and he throws like 4 or 5 punches every single time he gets into the pocket. He's throwing combinations. He's also, by the way, like maybe the one thing Jim Miller has athletically that most fighters don't is a really flexible set of legs. It's why he can be a really good submission grappler despite not being super mobile on the ground. And it's also why I think he is a fantastic kicker. And I think he needs to throw more kicks as a fighter. He's got a really good, powerful left kick and has for many years now. I think the real key to him here is, because I know he's vulnerable to kicks, is to kick back every single time Anthony Pettis kicks him. If he does that, I think he can break Anthony Pettis down. But
yeah,
it also maybe means like taking a clean Showtime shin to the liver or to the jaw. And so it could very well just be like the Joe Lozon fight that Pettis had, where he just lands a few kicks, sets up the big one, and puts Jim away.
And I think that Pettis' distance boxing is much cleaner and more consistent than Thiago Alves's, who kind of allowed Miller to get in on him a little more. I don't know, maybe not, but
he's accurate. He's got power. He's fast.
Yeah.
And once it becomes an exchange, I think Thiago Alves is the more technical fighter. But it's not like Pettis you can just run over him with your boxing,
Yeah.
But,
exactly. And so I don't know. I don't see Jim Miller getting just able to assert himself long enough for any moment of the fight, even if he gets moments. I think this could look a little bit something like Anthony Pettis's, like his fight with Eddie Alvarez, where he does get controlled some, and then he also busts Alvarez, busts Jim Miller up a lot, and it's just a question of how far you're leaning one way or the other.
Yeah. And Jim Miller is probably more Gilbert Melendez than he is Rafael dos Anjos, if he's going to try that pressuring game, or more Eddie Alvarez than he is RDA.
Yeah.
But, I think like Jim Miller kind of has to fight a very specific, perfect fight to win this. But also, when somebody does fight something like a perfect fight against Anthony Pettis, I know that he can't fight a perfect fight back.
Yeah.
So it's a tough one to call, and I'm really excited for it.
All right. Pettis is the favorite, opening at -265, adjusting up to -227, and slowly sliding back to -240. Jim Miller opening at +185, adjusting down to +178, and slowly sliding up to +193. So
there's maybe a look at Miller there. I don't know, man. It's a very hard fight to call.
Yeah, it might be just worth a look at Miller, because Pettis, he has had trouble lately, and if Miller's going to be an underdog to him, maybe a look.
But Miller is not Max Holloway or Oliveira. He's not that potent a finisher.
Some people were mentioning the other day that the Miller by submission is +1,200 right now.
Yeah, but I don't see Anthony Pettis getting submitted. I really don't.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Like, Miller's a good submission grappler, but he only has like 6 submissions in the UFC. And Anthony Pettis has never been submitted, to my recollection. He's very slick on the ground.
Yeah, Miller's last submission was his bulldog choke of Yancy Medeiros.
Yeah. Yeah, and Pettis has, never been submitted in 25 fights.
All right. That brings us to heavyweight bout Fabricio Werdum versus Alistair Overeem 3. We are well prepared for this because we just watched the second one.
Yeah.
Is this me? No, this is you. This is you.
Okay, so we watched fight 2. We kind of came to these conclusions that both guys are bullies in interesting ways. Pat disagreed with me somewhat on that on heavy hands, but I kind of still think it's the case that Werdum is like
Pat's all in for Fabricio, so he'd never say
true. Pat loves Fabricio. I think yeah, Fabricio is like for his entire career been the kind of bully that Overeem is now. And I think they've almost kind of reversed where Werdum has become more of like an Overeem type fighter where he like really tries to overwhelm people, and Overeem has become more of a trickster. I think Overeem the trickster may actually finally have what it takes to outwork Werdum the bully on the feet. Because here's the thing, I know like Werdum, he outstruck Overeem in the second fight. He even had moments doing that in their first fight, way before he was really a very good striker. But his striking is very much built on confidence. It's not like, Werdum has good timing. He throws combinations. He's well-trained. But he's not like a very slick striker. He basically has nothing resembling head movement. His defense is pretty awful if somebody is bold enough to throw back when he's throwing. And where Overeem, when he mentally breaks, crumbles, Werdum starts to make really stupid decisions. I think that is the way that he breaks. When he starts to lose confidence, he just like gets frustrated and goes nuts. And I think Overeem can get him to that point before Werdum can get Overeem to the point that he breaks. I think that Werdum is going to he's going to have a range fight with Overeem. I think Overeem's going to move a lot. I think he's going to pepper with kicks, look for the occasional counter, and deny Werdum much of a fight. And if that frustrates Werdum and he starts chasing Overeem, I think Overeem will catch him with like a big left hand and knock him out. So I like Alistair Overeem to win the rubber match.
This is a tough one for me.
It's very hard for me to call as well.
Partially because Fabricio Werdum, the latest footage you can watch on him, the most familiar you can be with where Fabricio Werdum is right now, his second fight with Travis Browne, which is such a shit show. It
the
is
weirdest.
Just Fabricio Werdum being like, "Let me do some stupid shit."
I mean, I'm right. That fight would have fit in so perfectly to a Bellator pay-per-view, would it not?
It was just like, let me do some stupid shit. Oh, you can't handle that. Well, let me do some basic shit. Oh, you can't handle that either. Yeah. Well, I guess I win then.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's really hard to tell. I mean, one of the things, obviously what we've seen with Overeem too lately, like his fight with Marc Hunt, like that really kind of let new bully Overeem shine.
Mm-hmm.
Because Marc Hunt, steps slower than he used to be, a little more predictable than he used to be. It really just let Overeem sort of dart in and out, back and forth. No, look for the setups that were coming, be relatively safe, and land random big stuff, and then get back outside without getting cracked too much. And same with, I don't know. I don't want to say same with Arlovsky or Dos Santos because it's not, but it's just the Arlovsky fight. Arlovsky's Arlovsky. He comes after you really quick, and then everything just sort of. He's like, it's like that car that starts in a car crash, and it's like really this, at the start, it's all together. It's like this big shining death sphere. And then tires start falling off of it, and then doors, and like it hasn't slowed down any. It's just more parts of it are just exploding.
Pieces of Andrei Arlovsky's game are flung off by centrifugal force as the fight plays out.
Yeah.
As he tumbles through the fight.
Exactly. And I don't know, like so the thing with Werdum is that I think Overeem would have to knock him out for that to work in Overeem's favor.
Yeah.
Because otherwise Werdum, like the Travis Browne fight, the Stipe Miocic fight, I can barely even reckon, honestly.
Yeah.
His weirdness, I think it might present it too much of a challenge for Overeem's new bully style. Like, it's going to be very difficult for modern Overeem to, like, jump in and, like, pick Werdum off and then get back out. If Werdum's like, fuck it, I'm going to throw a flying jump kick at you, you know?
Yeah, but, you know, like, that's, like, I don't think there's a ton of weird stuff in Verdum's game. He's just very cheeky with everything he does, but most of what he does is, like, 1-2s and body kicks. You know, like, he's not all flying side kicks. He's mostly meat and potatoes.
He's not. But he's weird enough and funky enough that I don't just trust it to be like...
Yeah, he's got shit crazy enough that...
Yeah, I don't trust that it's just going to be like, oh, he's going to be rote until things start going wrong, and then he's going to, like, get frustrated and do something weird. He's probably just going to throw some weird stuff out there, too.
Yeah.
And you know, like, that one knockout of Stipe Miocic, not quite willing to bank on that as, like, Werdum doesn't have a chin anymore.
Yeah. It's obviously not as good as it once was. It used to be titanium, but
I think he can throw just enough weird funk at Overeem to keep Overeem from bullying him and then maybe catch him out with something at some point. I'm going to bet on Werdum winning this by, like, I mean, I by knockout, but it's like, if neither of these guys knocks the other one out, this fight is going to be really weird.
These two make for a bizarre pairing. They always have, and I hope that this one somehow tops the strangeness of their second fight.
Yeah. So I'm picking Werdum, but man, it's a weird one. Odds, Fabricio Werdum is opened at plus 110, has adjusted up to plus 130, and has slowly drifted down to plus 104. And Overeem opened at minus 150 and has slowly drifted up to minus 129. So these odds are slowly getting to even.
Which I think it feels like that's where they should be.
Yeah. I would not bet on anything in this fight at all.
Nope.
That Travis Browne fight, you can't look at Travis Browne versus Fabricio Werdum and think, I've got a good handle on how Fabricio Werdum is going to approach this next fight.
Yeah, what do you glean from it? The only thing I will say about that fight, the one thing that makes me think that Overeem has openings here is that when Travis Browne, like, part of the reason Werdum had no problems is that Travis Browne was absolutely terrible in that fight.
Yeah.
He hurt his finger early and called timeout. He got knocked down in the first round. He couldn't get anything going. But in the last minute and a half, I don't know if you remember, because we just watched this one.
He actually started trying. Werdum was there to be hit.
He started to box Werdum up, and Verdum's defense was not good enough to keep Browne from just landing quick little shots one at a time. So Overeem's still pretty quick. He still covers distance. He's still tricky and confident in his power. I think the openings will be there. Question is, can he start capitalizing on it before Werdum, like, breaks him by just being a shit-eating madman?
Yeah, exactly.
Who knows?
All right. After that, we got a middleweight co-main event. Yoel Romero, Robert Whittaker.
Don't we have Blades Omialanchuk first?
Oh, that's right. Omialanchuk Blades. Man, I don't even care about that. With, like, going from Werdum Overeem to like Romero Whittaker, Blades Omialanchuk.
This was supposed to be Lawler Cerrone, so
true.
It's a bit of a letdown.
So, Blades Omialanchuk, this is me, I believe.
We can make it quick, right?
Blades should smash Omialanchuk just through sheer size and force. Omialanchuk's greatest talents are that he's incredibly durable and that he will keep throwing late into fights and keep working even when he's tired. He is otherwise undersized, not a terrific wrestler, and a surviving grappler, but that's about it. And I expect Blades to just go out there and throw him around.
it's a reasonable but not particularly bold matchup for if you're looking at developing Curtis Blades. Like you're like, okay, well, we'll give him someone who's experienced, someone who could test the holes in his striking game if he chooses to strike with him, and somebody who has like some tricks up their sleeve in the clinch, somebody who can give Curtis Blades a surprise every now and then, but who it's pretty clear to see does not have a really the right game to consistently beat Curtis Blades. So we'll see a lot of wrestling, a lot of throwing. I think Curtis Blades may give Omilanchuk his first TKO, not by really putting him away, but just by holding him in a position and peppering him until the referee has no choice but to stop it.
Yeah, Blades has that Brock Lesnar thing going on where no one punch from Brock Lesnar ever knocked anyone out.
Yeah.
It was just that his fists were so big and he was so powerful that he would just pulp you over the course of a few minutes.
He would do like if anyone ever annoys Brock Lesnar and prompts him to do the jerk off motion, don't stand near his hand, because that's basically the style of ground and pound he and Blades bring to the table, and it hurts a lot more than it looks like it should.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like if somebody had a like 10-pound sledgehammer and they were just tapping you in the face with it over and over and over again. And you're like, the first one, you're like, ow, ow. And then you're like, your jaw is broken and your cheek is like busted. And suddenly you're just like, you know, laying in a jelly.
First one doesn't hurt that bad. 30 of them later, and suddenly you look like you've been eating strawberries.
Yeah.
What can you do?
Blades is a prohibitive favorite. Opened at minus 405, is now to minus 742. And Daniel Omilanchuk opened at plus 285, now up to plus 506.
I mean, those are insanely bold odds for a heavyweight fight, but it is very difficult to really argue with where the chips have fallen.
Over 1.5 rounds is minus 130. Under 1.5 is plus 110. Blades by TKO KO is plus 110. So
Omilanchuk never been stopped. I mean, he's really tough, but
he's really tough. But Blades doesn't. Has Blades ever submitted anyone?
I don't think so.
So
it's all just ground and pound TKOs.
So, yeah. All right. Now, Yoel Romero versus Robert Whittaker, which now you get to talk about first, and like fuck my whole day. Come on.
It's not even a fight that I'm particularly excited to talk about because it's really hard to get a good read on what's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's mostly because of Yoel Romero, who is the soul of a 4,000-year-old pharaoh inside of the body of an action figure, and has
and has stolen the identity of a 40-year-old Cuban man.
Yeah, he is like he is without style. Like all the silly foo-foo crap that like people like John Kavanaugh like to talk about, like, oh, like being formless, like that is Yoel Romero, but it only works because he is probably the best athlete in the sport. He's super powerful, cat-like in his agility and proprioception, incredibly accurate. His timing is great. Like nobody sees an opening for a big strike, identifies what strike should be used to capitalize on it, and then lands that strike in such a small space of time as Yoel Romero. And that's why he's scary, because like Chris Weidman was having a competitive fight with him, you know. A lot of people have been having competitive fights with Yoel Romero. He rarely like blows somebody out in a round in a way that makes you think, oh, this guy can't be beaten. But then like you give him one opening in a third round usually, and you're dead. It just melts you. So that's tricky, you know. And then obviously in this fight, a big question mark will be how assertive can he be with his wrestling game. Romero is a world-class wrestler.
My dog just got a bath, and so she was going nuts over here.
Oh,
she stopped now.
I knew something was happening over in that corner.
It was just all this like snarling and grunting.
I heard that. Yeah. And then there was also the dog making noises.
Yeah, well, you know, whatever.
So, yeah, Romero's crazy dangerous, good wrestling, super athlete. and also willing to do absolutely anything to win. Like even in the Weidman fight, it's not like he looked pretty fresh. He didn't even look like he was gassing as badly as he has in the past. And even then, he had his corner dump a bunch of water all over his legs that had to be cleaned off before the third round could begin. He never stops cheating. And that's kind of why I love him. But
yeah,
it makes it, again, it's another layer of like, how the hell do you have a firm expectation for what Yoel Romero is going to do to you? Robert Whittaker's not the same way. He, like Romero, is a really great athlete. That's not talked about enough, but Whittaker has a lot of power. He has a lot of speed. He shows in scrambles and in defending takedowns and in moving away from counters how very agile, and I keep saying agile in today's episode, but that's what Whittaker is. He's very like sprightly and strong and explosive. He's not just the technical guy in this fight. He can match Romero probably in at least some of the scrambles and exchanges. And then technically as a striker, he is a league above Romero. He's a lot more put together, a lot more process driven, works a nice jab. He's willing to be creative and jump across a lot of space with a strike if he knows that the opening is there. And he's defensively sound enough to do that without getting punished. So I think I like Robert Whittaker in this fight. And I think it's mostly based on him being able to scramble out of takedown attempts early and get Romero to a point where he's tired enough that Whittaker can start pouring on the volume. But Romero is not done when he's tired. He is never done. And so Whittaker could even be controlling the fight completely and still get caught. And you couldn't even call it unlikely because Romero does that to almost everybody. So it's tough. But I tend to go for the process-driven fighters. I think Whittaker with the volume, the footwork, the defense, the way he approaches fights is just more reliable. And maybe that doesn't matter when you're an alien like Yoel Romero, but Robert Whittaker is close to that level athletically and then far beyond that level in terms of process. So I like Robert Whittaker by, I think, maybe a late TKO.
Yeah. One of the hardest things for me here is to know, like, we know Robert Whittaker now, is a good enough wrestler to keep Jacare from holding him down. Good enough
to actually have Jacare take his back and then get back to his feet without getting choked out or even having his back controlled.
Yeah. We don't know if he's a good enough wrestler to stop Yoel Romero from taking him down and then working a top ride. We don't know that because Yoel Romero's wrestling game, like, you see him against like Chris Weidman and taking Chris Weidman down, or Chris Weidman trying to take him down, and Yoel Romero just like sprinting away and then reversing like mid takedown attempt to get Chris Weidman down in some ridiculous athletic feat that no mere mortal man should be able to.
Yeah. Or hitting like in the space of half a second a misdirection foot sweep and then teleporting to Chris Weidman's back. Like pretty crazy.
It's crazy shit that never really, like, you don't know until you see somebody fight him how they're gonna look in that fight. The other question would be Robert Whittaker's durability. Because Whittaker is durable. We know that. We know he can take shots. But it's not like he hasn't been knocked out.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like it's impossible for him to be cracked or hurt. Derek Brunson hurt him. And Yoel Romero hits just about harder than anybody else.
Yeah.
In a single strike.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't sustain it. It's not like a barrage, some finishing barrage where he knows once he's got you hurt, Yoel Romero's going to turn it on and is like an all-time great finisher. He can.
It can be. I mean, the barrage he put on Jacare after knocking him down was even more vicious than the one Whittaker put on Jacare, although it didn't get the finish.
It didn't get the finish. But even more so, he's just capable of hitting you with something out of nowhere so hard that even if it doesn't knock you out, it breaks a part of you.
Mm-hmm. Usually the face part.
Yeah, the face part. He hits people hard enough that it's just like, if he's still conscious, we should probably stop this fight.
Mm-hmm.
And that causes so many question marks. Because too, like, Whittaker is also kind of a momentum fighter.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit. Like, he can catch people out of the gate if he can hit that, like, perfect counter. But if it's about implementing a consistent offensive game over rounds, he kind of has to build that momentum a little. Like, he has to get comfortable. He has to find his speed. He has to have the time to make that work.
Mm-hmm.
And giving Yoel Romero early, like, if he can't find a counter and hurt Romero early, like, that may allow Romero to do enough work to make coming back really a difficult task.
And it could make it really, like, it could be more difficult than usual for Whittaker to get going in the first place, because a lot of times I think he's getting his reads, he's figuring out what the other guy is going to offer him. And Romero has that weird thing where he sometimes throws so little that you don't really know what it looks like when he does each attack. Like, he doesn't give you a sampling of his skill set all at once.
Yeah,
I don't think he threw a flying knee before the flying knee that knocked out Chris Weidman, you know?
Oh, like in his fight with Lyoto Machida, like, Romero just kind of sat there and listlessly let Machida kind of pick a kickboxing match with him, and then finally was like, you know what, I'm just going to knock you out now.
He decided to finish him.
Yeah.
He got bored and decided to finish him.
And that is just, it's so hard to judge. And part of me looks at the first round, or the round that Whittaker had with Derek Brunson, and says, if Yoel Romero goes after him like Brunson did, does Whittaker get the chance to bounce back and knock Brunson out?
Yeah.
And I don't think he does. Or to bounce back and knock Romero out, and I don't think he does. I don't know. I don't want to pick Yoel Romero, because
why not? He's awesome.
Because I like Robert Whittaker. I like him a lot. Yeah. And I want him to succeed. But I'm going to pick Yoel Romero here.
Yeah, it's hard to root against Bobby Knuckles, but and it's not that hard to root against Yoel Romero, really, but
it's no fun to root against him.
Yeah. For me, I would say, like, the one example that stands out to me is Romero's fight with Jacare. He had in front of him a fairly slow, methodical fighter, and just let so much of the fight slip away, despite the success he had early.
Yeah,
like he really, like, Jacare outboxed him in the third round. You know what I mean? Like, Jacare was putting combinations on him, and if Whittaker can even just start to get going, I think that could become kind of an avalanche. But, you know, like, the thing is, like, who's to say whether Yoel Romero is not also a fourth and fifth round knockout machine? We know, like, this guy gets tired. He definitely gives away late rounds, but he also almost always wins in the last round. So who the fuck knows?
I don't know. Yeah,
it's gonna be awesome. I'm so excited for it.
The 5-round fight does actually make me like lean more towards Whittaker, but he has to survive so much first. I don't know.
And he still might just, like, make headway and get stopped. Like, this is the Aldo Holloway or the Ferguson Khabib of the middleweight division. These are the two best dudes in the best fight possible.
Yep.
That always makes it really difficult to call, and no matter how hard you try to stop it, your personal feelings always creep into that kind of analysis.
Yeah. And like Aldo Holloway, it may end up being, like, this totally different, more decisive fight than you would have ever thought.
Sure. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I'm super excited for it, though.
I am too.
This is the main event of the weekend for me, is this fight.
So Yoel Romero opened at -150, is now slowly trended up to -101. Robert Whittaker opened at +120 and is now slowly trended to -123.
Yeah.
So
even odds. Even odds sounds fine to me.
Yep. All right, that brings us to our main event now. Amanda Nunes, Valentina Shevchenko.
Is there a fight does not go the distance prop bet for Romero Whittaker?
Yeah, absolutely there is. Fight doesn't go to decision is minus 325.
I mean, that might actually still be a bet, worth a bet, but even so, like I don't
fight
know.
Goes to decision is plus 250. Under a round and a half is plus 170. Over a round and a half is minus 200.
Anything specific? It's
yeah.
I can't get into anything that requires me to have a detailed, nuanced understanding of how the fight will play out because I don't have that.
All right. That brings us to Amanda Nunes, Valentina Shevchenko. And, man, this is also, like, so many of these fights is so tough to figure out. The big one that is tough to figure out about this fight is Amanda Nunes' gas tank.
Mm-hmm.
Because the chances that she puts Valentina Shevchenko away early are very slim. I think. I mean, Nunes.
It's certainly not a non-existent chance. Like she had her close, but I agree. Like we know for certain two things from the first fight: that Nunes gassed, and that Shevchenko was tough enough and crafty enough not to get finished.
Yeah.
So the question is, are both of those things still true in this fight?
And unfortunately, Nunes' fights against Miesha Tate and Ronda Rousey don't tell us much at all. Shevchenko, her fights with Holly Holm and Juliana Pena tell us something, especially her fight with Holm. Well, both fights tell us that if she has an approach that is working, she will hit it consistently. Mm-hmm. Like, you give her a mark to hit, and Valentina Shevchenko will hit that mark minute after minute, round after round, all night.
Yeah. And I would add to that her last three fights also have the pattern of Shevchenko getting better by strides with each passing round.
Yeah. One of the questions for me in this fight, too, comes down to the clinch. Mm-hmm. Because in their first fight, Shevchenko looked for the clinch against Nunes because she was getting, because Nunes is throwing heat from range. And Nunes immediately took her down. Just threw her to the mat and overwhelmed her there. Mm-hmm. Then you look at Shevchenko since then. That was a pretty early fight in her UFC career for her. You could say that it was Shevchenko's, it was a massive step up from Sarah Kaufman and Jan Finney and other fighters she'd faced before that in terms of power and athleticism. And since then, like her fight against Juliana Pena, Shevchenko hung out in the clinch and took Pena down repeatedly from the clinch with like the same foot sweep because Pena has the same crazy problem of being so dialed in on one thing she can't see any other part of the fight.
Yeah.
And so you have when this fight takes place in the clinch, because it will inevitably, both women like the clinch to some degree, and Valentina Shevchenko wants it. She's very willing to accept it. Does she get taken down by Amanda Nunes again? Is she ready for that this time? Has she improved her takedown defense since that first fight? If she has, a lot of what Nunes was doing even early on, like, she didn't hit Shevchenko clean that often. She threw a lot of combos that did not have a lot of success landing. Mm-hmm. And it makes me feel like the margin for Nunes' success in this fight is really all about knocking Valentina Shevchenko out.
Or submitting her.
And I'm not also necessarily sold on Like, I mean, Nunes is a good grappler, but I'm not necessarily sold on her as like a lockdown amazing grappler. You know, like her kickboxing, a lot of it seems predicated on speed and power and just the ability to be the better athlete in the moment who jumps on the opportunity when it presents itself. I'm going to pick Shevchenko to take this one. I just think that Nunes, I haven't seen enough growth in her game to make me assume that she's the fighter in round one that she is for the rest of the fight. And if she doesn't finish Shevchenko in round one, I know Shevchenko is going to continue to get better and continue to hit openings and continue to find the weak points in Nunes's game as the fight goes on. And I have to have more faith in that in a title fight, and with somebody like Shevchenko, who has never been, whose only stoppage loss is a TKO doctor stoppage against Liz Carmouche.
Yeah, there are a lot of question marks about this fight. I think you have to, in fights like this, sort of just cling to the few certainties that you do have as an analyst. And while I think it is still possible that Amanda Nunes can sort out her stamina issues, like she's not the type of fighter who is doomed to gas in every fight. She's super fast and powerful, and she likes to throw everything with power. You can do that. You just have to dial back on how often you throw. You have to be really controlled and disciplined, and pick your spots. And also maybe you have to be willing to get tired and then coast until your wind comes back. And Nunes has obviously made strides technically as a striker. Her footwork has gotten much, much better, and has continued to do so with each fight, going back to the bout with which one was it? Back to like the Sarah McMahon fight. We've really seen these nice strides from her. Great combination punching, obviously tremendous power, and the grappling. I think maybe the most dangerous thing that Nunes does is throw strikes on the ground. Her ground and pound is vicious, and that's what I think makes her such a good submission grappler. She just smashes people until they give their back, and then she chokes them out. But I don't know. I have no evidence to suggest that Amanda Nunes has learned to control how much energy she pours out in those first few rounds. Yep. And I also suspect that with a fighter like Valentina Shevchenko, who is to a fault committed to waiting and letting her opponent lead, way too patient at times for her own good, I don't have any doubts really that Nunes is going to be the first one to start engaging. And whether it's because of a takedown and she sees Shevchenko kind of passive on her back, or it's an exchange, I think that Nunes will have some big moment early. But I think that may end up being her undoing, is that she's going to see that big moment and just go way too hard trying to seize it. And if she doesn't finish Shevchenko, like the certainties I have about Shevchenko are, I know she can survive an Amanda Nunes onslaught. And I know that she does get better as the fight goes on. I know also that she struggles to put out enough output to really put a stamp on a round. But even so, the third round of their first fight was probably a 10-8 for Shevchenko by today's standards. And I know that Nunes could knock Shevchenko out or submit her. I know that she will have those opportunities, but I have no clue whether she can fight once she gets tired. And the evidence of Amanda Nunes' record suggests that she can. I mean, it's at least the kind of thing that I have to see it before I can expect it. Because I know that throughout her career, Nunes has done well in the first round and then gotten beaten up or submitted in the second and third. Those have been the source of all of her losses. It was the reason that the fight with Shevchenko felt close. Nunes didn't really have any trouble in the first two rounds, and then was just barely clinging on to survive in round three. And it seems like too easy of a prediction to make, but boy, we do have a blueprint in that first fight, with a blueprint that I think probably represents the most likely way a matchup between these two plays out. And if it plays out even just similar to that fight, then Nunes is probably in for 2 more rounds of hell.
Yeah.
in which case Shevchenko is my pick.
That fight was just a year ago. Like, it's not like that was like 3 years ago.
Right.
So we're like, oh, and Nunes, she really has had a lot of opportunities to fix everything since then. It's like, no, that was last year. That was March of 2016.
There's a lot to be said. Like, look at Tony Martin. Like, there's a lot to be said for how polishing your technique can allow you to. You can make your gas tank seem a lot better. You're not wasting energy. But, like Nunes was polishing her technique. It looked really good before the Shevchenko fight. In her last 2 fights, she's just destroyed people. We have no idea and nothing to suggest that the problem that has haunted her throughout her career has ever actually been addressed face-to-face.
Odds on this fight, Shevchenko is the favorite at the moment, opening at plus 120 and having a couple of dips, adjusted down initially to minus one. Down to minus 113. Slowly rose for a while up until the 26th of June to plus 108, and has dropped sharply again to minus 122. Now sitting at minus 115. And then Amanda Nunes opened at minus 150, adjusted up to minus 114, slowly slid down to minus 130, adjusted, went up sharply to minus 101, is now to minus 109. So you've got minus 115 for Shevchenko, minus 109 for Nunes. I honestly think this fight's a little easier to call than being that even.
Yeah, I mean, I really think there is a serious chance that Nunes finishes Shevchenko early this time. She could really just overwhelm her and catch her cold. I mean, Holly Holm knocked Shevchenko down. Didn't hurt her, but she can be caught early. She does a lot of waiting and just standing there. And when you know what I mean? Like, Nunes has that Tyron Woodley factor.
Let me put it this way. How much of your feeling that this is a dead even fight is based solely around Amanda Nunes being champion at the moment? Like, if she didn't have the belt around her waist and Shevchenko had the belt around her waist, would you feel like this would be a dead even fight?
It doesn't feel dead even. I favor Shevchenko.
Yeah.
I just think like it's like 60-40. I don't think it's easy to call because
I'm not saying I just think that Shevchenko deserves to be a little better than even odds.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I just think Nunes has the Tyron Woodley factor. She will really shock you with her ferocity and speed and power if you allow her to. And Shevchenko's the kind of fighter to allow that in the early going. So there are risks.
That's true. We could get Wonder Boy Woodley 3.
Oh God. Well, or I'll even be disappointed if Nunes, like, I would love to see Nunes win a 4th round.
Yeah.
Like, that would be the fight I would want. I'd love to have Nunes as a champion proving that she can do that. Honestly, one of the worst results for me will if Nunes knocks Shevchenko out in the first. Like, well,
nothing.
I still don't know where she stands. God damn it!
All right. Well, on that note, Connor's worst fear is being a first-round knockout.
My worst fear is an exciting finish.
We will see everyone next time. You can find me on Twitter at TheZaneSimon. You can find Connor on Twitter at BoxingBush. That's BUSCH. You can find both of us over at BloodyElbow.com. It's where we do all our various things. Give our show a like, thumbs up on YouTube. That helps us a ton. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, MMANation.com, DOTCOM. Where you get all the latest Bloody Elbow shows, videos, news, analysis. I will not be here for the 6th round on Friday, but I will be for the one on Saturday. And then we will be back next week to get hyped for UFC Fight Night Nelson versus Ponzinibbio in Glasgow, Scotland. So
I'm down for that.
Yeah. We'll have all our normal shows. If I Did It, Care Don't Care, Vivisection, Heavy Hands, all that good stuff. So thanks, everyone, and we will see you next time.
Awesome.